In this last episode, I was speaking with William, the host of UnDunn podcast, and we just jumped right into the meat of the conversation. We didn't do an introduction, so I'm doing it now. It's a great conversation. We talked about censorship, uh, Trump, COVID, Biden administration, uh, healthcare, gun reform, all kinds of things. So it went on for a bit longer than we planned, but we just couldn't cut it off. So we're going to schedule another one coming here soon. But I hope you enjoy.
So, buddy, I have to ask. Listening to your podcast, I want to say thank you for doing what you do. You are something that I think we had talked briefly before in email. Are two not necessarily opposing ideologies. I think you and I actually agree on a few things. It's the mechanisms of the end results of how we go about it and how we achieve those. And something that last year that I started doing, I asked about 155 people what was on the 2020 ballot for them. What was on the ballot for them in November? I wanted them to rank from 1 to 5. What from most important to least important. And doing that, something that I found was the common people really do know a lot more than we give them credit for. So anywhere from grocery store workers working out in West Texas all the way to CEOs in Dallas, just to give you an idea of what the sample size was. And everyone is essentially overlapped. The always typically in the top three was COVID. The governmental response to COVID and how do we get past COVID. Number 2 and 3 is where things get interesting. Number 2 was, I think, out of the 155, 80 of them was healthcare. How do we fix the United States healthcare system? Number 3 is where I think things become a little bit more partisan, and it ranged anywhere from immigration reform in the United States, all the way to the social welfare system that we currently have in the United States, and how do we fix it?
Uh-huh.
Ultimately, though, I think this is the recurring theme: is that the current state of the United States, that something is wrong, that the alarm bells are going off, that something in people's lizard brain knows that the way things are just aren't working. They're not working for them, you know. Um, and in a way, why I started podcasting and getting into broadcasting, funny story. So in 2015, if you would have met me, I was a I was a college student here at Texas State University. I was actually recruited to run at Texas State University. Thankfully, I got out of my small rural town of Sonora.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Graduated with around 40. I think I'm being generous when I say 40. It's probably like 38 people in my graduating class. And there's only 3 ways people got out of that high school. They either A, they went to the oil field and worked in the energy industry in Texas. B, they went to the military, or C, they were lucky enough to get a scholarship. And sad is that I think the story of America right now. This whether in 2020, you know what the number one indicator was if you were going to vote for Donald Trump or not?
I don't know.
A 4-year college degree. 4-year college degree. And I think that's alarming. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's alarming. Whether or not I disagree with Donald Trump's policies or not,
Uh-huh.
there's something happening in not only rural America, but middle class and working class America. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I briefly talked about this. People now feel there was a Pew Research survey done in 2020.
Uh-huh.
70% of Americans believe that we no longer live in a meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
That is alarming. Even more alarming, 13% of Americans feel engaged and valued at their job.
That's pretty low.
And that's problematic. That is
Yeah, yeah.
extremely problematic. What do you do when 90 or 87% of the rest of the workforce don't feel valued or engaged? You know, I don't, I know what I do know is that what we've been doing the last 30, 40 years, you know, outsourcing and, you know, deindustrializing the United States isn't working. It's not working for a majority of Americans. Um, and what I do know is if we don't do anything, is going to have a deleterious effect on not only the United States economy, but the United States Americans' psyche more than anything.
Hmm. You said something. Sorry, we didn't really do our. This is good stuff, but I didn't technically do the introduction, but I'm just gonna put this in, I suppose. Because I want to keep going down this road since you kind of just opened the door to something that I found interesting that I heard a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
Um, do you know about the? You mentioned that you did a kind of your own survey, basically. Did like how many people did you say that you did?
About 155.
Okay. Did you differentiate the difference between when they give you the answer, who was like on the left side of the spectrum versus right side of the spectrum?
I actually, so one of the questions I wanted to ask, because this is a good indicator that pollsters got wrong in 2016,
Mm-hmm.
is talking about their support for Donald Trump,
Uh-huh.
the side that Trump supported. The question was, did they feel comfortable ask or talking about them supporting Donald Trump or not?
Mm-hmm.
And of those 155, you know how many said they were uncomfortable talking about it?
I would assume the majority. I remember, I mean, maybe not the entire majority, but I'm pretty sure it's a big number because I remember a while ago going through some numbers about people that were afraid to admit who they were voting for, or afraid of admitting that they were voting for Trump. But I
If
don't know.
I, yeah, no, so just my little survey, my little bullshit survey,
Uh-huh.
120 of them, 120, you know, and granted, you got to picture Texas. You know, Texas's demographics are changing
Mm-hmm.
fairly large. Unfortunately, or not, I'm not going to say unfortunately, but I have a diverse group of beliefs in my friend group. So,
Uh-huh.
and so even myself, you know, I think a lot of people who know me know I'm probably the biggest lefty in the room, but I will thankfully give, you know, Trump credit where it's due.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think people that have my political persuasion do that. They've got brain rot when it comes to what did they what did they call that, Trump derangement
Yeah,
syndrome?
Trump arrangement. I mean, that's one of the things that over the last what 4 or 5 years when Trump was running, when I started paying attention, because I was in college at the time, and when I started paying attention, I hated politics, and I used to my stance all the time when someone started talking about politics, it's just like pff, I just don't want to talk about it, and I start paying attention a little bit more towards my later years in college, and I just started noticing inconsistencies in the media, and I never, I assumed as a kid that the media was bound by law to say the truth. Like I just never thought that they might say something that's not true. I figured it would be illegal. And so I start watching interviews, and then I I watch like a recap of an interview. Like I had just watched the interview, then on a different channel I watch a recap, and the recap repeatedly said things that the interview did not actually say. It was stuff that's slightly out of context, jumping to conclusions based on things that were said. And I thought, well, that seems really dishonest. And that was the first time that a light flickered in my mind that I can't necessarily trust what I'm seeing. And ever since that point with the Trump derangement syndrome, it's just every single thing that he does, even if it's been done repeatedly in the past, it's uh, a new level of outrage. It's something that he's doing that's unheard of, and it started pushing me to the right. And that's something we exchanged in the email, to where you said you've gone more left in throughout your when you were in university, to where I've gone more to the right. And I think the reason I've gone more to the right is because I'm seeing such an extreme level of bias against Trump. Yes, he does a lot of stupid stuff. He says an outrageous amount of stupid stuff, but it doesn't seem to be a fair line of comparing it to what your own party says, and then just making an equal line. It's like, okay, well, here's something that's bad. Trump passed that line. Okay, let's criticize him for that. But it seems something in their own party, as far as the left goes, I guess the hot topic right now is the kids in cages.
Yeah.
When he had, what was it, 2,700 kids at that point, it was complete outrage. Everyone going crazy about this. These are concentration camps. This is racist, all these things. And now you have a multiple of that, 13,000 plus, I think. I haven't looked at the most recent numbers. But you see the media and left-wing politicians justifying it. Well, it's a transition period. We need to, it's excuse after excuse, instead of being honest and saying, well, if it was a crisis and it was racist then and it was concentration camps then, why isn't it now?
Have you seen the memes of of a drone flying in 20 don't laugh, man. The drone flying in 2019. It's it's got MAGA on it, and then the drone flying in 2021 with LGBTQ flag, and
I have not.
yeah, no. And so the point I want to make is it's the same shit, just a different person. And I think a lot of people don't realize this. To start on a timeline, there's a really good study I encourage you to read. It's the 100 Million Project by the Knight Foundation. And do you know who the largest voting bloc in the United States is?
No.
Non-voters, people who choose not to
Oh, yeah.
vote.
Okay. Yeah, that would make sense.
And so, why do they choose not to vote? Well, they feel the system's rigged. They feel like no matter what, their voice doesn't count.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got this trend year after election after election, year after year, to where people are choosing to not participate. 2020 and 2018 were out of the norm. 2018 was the highest turnout in midterms, and 2020 was the highest turnout in an election ever. And so people feel that the system's rigged against them, that no matter what, that their voice isn't going to be heard. And in fact, that goes into the next study. There's a study done by Princeton University in 2017 that found that the United States is an oligarchy.
And how did you come to that conclusion?
And so there are 72 so this study went over, I think it was 1,170 pieces of legislation. And they compared that to popular support based on percentages. So, for example, minimum wage has, depending on who you poll, 70% to a 80% favorability rating. And it's bipartisanly supported that we need to increase the minimum wage. It's been the longest since, what was the last time we increased it? 2008, 2009, right? So 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so majority of Americans want to increase the minimum wage, yet we continue not to.
Mm-hmm.
93% of Americans want a federal jobs guarantee, yet we continue not to. Marijuana legalization. Majority of Americans now support marijuana legalization.
Mm-hmm.
And I know state by state it's coming more and more,
Yeah.
but we, as the federal government, I mean, hell, did you see how the Biden administration kicked out 11 of their, I'm guessing, whether they were interns or whatever, they answered honestly that they smoked marijuana, and they kicked them out. And they
Yeah,
said,
I didn't get to read about it, but I saw that, but I didn't get to follow up on it. So I don't know much about it, but
and yeah,
yeah, I did see that.
so they went even further, and in these the people that they based off of income groups, and versus the income groups of the wealthy and the top 1%, just to use some, I guess, political buzzwords.
Mm-hmm.
They, if I'm not mistaken, it's 9 times out of 10 the legislation that the richest 1% or the establishment wants gets passed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's extremely problematic, as you and I both know. It's money in Congress and in Washington is poisoning the system.
Mm-hmm.
And at the very least, whether it's we, ban lobbying, but honestly, I'm nihilistic about money and politics. I think at this point is a symbiotic relationship.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one way to ameliorate this is to change our voting system. Instead of this winner take all voting system, we need ranked choice voting. And so,
Can you go in a little bit when you say ranked choice voting?
yeah. So ranked choice voting is a voting system that is utilized by other Western democracies. That essentially, one, instead of this popularity contest that we have going, or whoever can raise the most money, the politicians actually have to talk about their policies, and the best policy wins, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so essentially, there's typically, I want to say, 4 or 5 rounds of voting. After every round of voting, the person with the least amount of votes
Mm-hmm.
gets knocked out, and their votes are distributed to the candidates evenly. And then same thing in the second round, same thing in the third round, to where eventually it is a more fair and more
Mm-hmm.
um, transparent election process. You
Do you
know,
think do you think that that is possible when a candidate comes up under the label of a party? Do you think that there's too many partisan people that will just go ahead and select the one on their side, or would they need to? Because for me, I think political parties are just horrible.
yeah.
If I had it my way, I would say there is no political party. You're not allowed to affiliate with a political party if you're running for office, and you just basically have to come up. It'd be like behind the curtain. You say your policy, you get your policy picked, and I think what you're just I don't recall the name that. What did you call that? It's
Ranked choice voting.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that that would be a great way to do it, and then you break it down by rounds. Okay, well, here's the first topic, here's second topic, and so on, and then you vote for that, and then whoever happens to come out at the end wins. But I'm not sure that that's possible if they're under the banner of a political party.
So I'm gonna say yes and no. I know that's a
Well,
non-answer.
consider.
Exactly. So yes, if we defeat the feeling of apathy that millions of Americans feel. You
Mhm.
know, Americans now are increasingly becoming more nihilistic and apathetic, and that's not good. And so we need to defeat that apathy. Secondly, I agree. I think, from whether it's George Washington or Eisenhower, warned us about partisan political parties, that it is party before the people, and that just doesn't work in a representative republic. Or even it's almost anti-democratic to an extent, and we saw this during the Trump years. Even something, for example, something I agreed with Trump on, the denuclearization of North Korea.
Mhm.
Hey, that's a good policy. That's a great policy, in fact. We should try to denuclearize as many nuclear weapon holding nations in the world. But because Trump did it, you've got people screaming on MSNBC and CNN that's a bad policy, and that he's, holding Kim Jong Un up on a, golden platter.
Yeah.
And I think that's absolutely ridiculous. If anyone has done any reading on whether it was Hiroshima, or just the destruction that nuclear devices cause, oh, they would agree with it, wholesale. But I think when it comes to partisanship, it's I think psychologically there's something, that Americans have been going through the last four years. Or actually, I'm gonna go as far back and go to 2000, the 2000 election between Al Gore and George W. Bush. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. I remember my second grade teacher was like, "Hey, little Will, who you gonna vote for?" Well, I don't know. I'm 7 years old. I gotta watch Dragon Ball Z after I get out of class, Miss McDonald.
I
And
watched Power Rangers when I got off school, but I wouldn't admit it to my friends. When there's this one kid at school, he was talking about Power Rangers, and it was like I was trying to feel it out, and I remember this. It's like, oh, he likes Power Rangers. It's so stupid, but I knew I was gonna go home and watch the new Power Rangers every day after
yeah,
school.
man, something that I was bad about as a kid, because I grew up poor. I grew up
Mm.
poor, and I would lie to my friends that I'd seen a movie when I hadn't, and I would try to bullshit as best as I could. And I'm like 8 years old, and like, oh yeah, totally saw Godzilla, 1999 Zilla when that came out, and
I got that movie for my. Oh no, wait! I gave that movie to one of my friends for his birthday, and then his dad made fun of me.
Yeah, he threw it away probably too.
Probably. Yeah.
And I'm assuming you and that friend don't talk anymore, right?
Actually, that's a sad story. He had unfortunately, he had a drug addiction. He ended up passing on. But yeah, that was so long ago now.
Man, to I can relate. There's two really good books that I encourage you to read.
Hmm.
Uh, Deaths of Despair by Ann Case and Drug Dealer MD. They both cover two epidemics in the United States that are currently happening. The rise of deaths of despair, so that's defined as alcoholism, so liver cirrhosis,
Hmm.
uh, and then opioid overdoses and suicides in the United States have continued to rise in the last from 1999 onward. Deaths of despair have continued to rise. In 2013 onward is this horrible negative trend. And
Hmm.
so, for example, in the book, it talks about Kentucky. And in Kentucky, in rural America, um, it's a red state, but opioid deaths back in 2010 were 37 per 1,000. You know what they were in 2014?
I do not.
137. So what's happening to rural America?
Uh-huh.
They're becoming addicted. They're becoming increasingly unhappy, whether it's in their workplace or whether it is in their financial situation in their lives. And Drug Dealer MD covers essentially how, doctors pretty much started pawning off, painkillers to their patients instead of prescribing, physical therapy as an alternative method
Hmm.
or any other. And honestly, I'm not into homeopathic remedies, but anything else other than opioids is a better. You have better outcomes than anything. I know opioids do help. My mother has had 9 back surgeries. She walks with like a hump and
Uh-huh.
whatnot, and she doesn't really get to live with dignity anymore. I'll admit she was addicted to opioids
Mm.
for several years, and it was increasingly not only depressing, but it was almost alienating. Who is this person? This is not my mother.
Yeah.
She's up till 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. I'd walk out in my kitchen and she'd be cooking eggs and slumped over the stove and whatnot.
Yeah.
And the story of both your friend and my mother is happening across all America to millions of families, and
Yeah.
it's sad. It is absolutely sad, and the Trump administration did a great job of trying to rein in Purdue Pharma, but they got away with a slap on the wrist.
Hmm.
I think they got fined $93 million. I may be wrong on that stat, but I know it's typically these fines are a slap on the wrist.
Hmm.
There's not real actual consequences for what they did.
Yeah.
And
Well, if they're
I
making, sorry, go ahead.
oh no, go ahead, go ahead.
What I was going to say, I mean, I don't know what I was listening to the other day, but they were talking about this, and they had talked about this is a subject that I don't know a ton about, so correct me if you know that I'm wrong. But Trump had put in some sort of legislation that allowed prescription medicine to be cheaper, and then apparently Biden rolled that back. Do you know anything about that that caused
I
that price to go back up?
Yeah, I had saw that at the beginning of the transition period. Essentially, Biden, it was a particular prescription, so insulin
Mm.
was one of them. I think we could both agree that the healthcare system in the United States just isn't working. It is absolutely destroying millions of Americans' lives. We rank amongst I think the 11 industrialized nations in terms of health outcomes. We rank number 11 out of 11. In terms of cost, we rank number one. And so I think whether it was Donald Trump, I think Trump is symptomatic of something that's been happening in the United States for the last 30, 40 years.
Mhm.
I don't view him as the cause of anything. These problems predated him, and I don't think a lot of liberals understand that.
I think that's one of the big problems. Is it seems like these I don't know what it is, but it seemed like everybody just suddenly turned on their lights when Trump was in office because there's a lot of things that were happening long before and that have been done many times before that Trump was continuing or maybe increasing. And it suddenly turned into this firestorm, like this. I can't believe he would do this. And it's like, well, what about in 2014 when the same thing was happening? It's
Mhm.
like, so it just seems like the media, and this is, you said something earlier that made me think of this. I don't remember what it was, but at one point Trump said that the media is the enemy of the people, and a lot of people got very upset by this, left and right. And I was at that time thinking, that's a little bit extreme. But as time has gone on over, and I keep hearing these stories that are false, and they're not correcting them when the evidence comes out, or else they are correcting them, but it's something that no one ever sees because it's like a far back page. It's not a headline story like it was when they reported it. I think, in my opinion, the media is responsible for more division than anything
Mhm.
in the United States, and that it seems like across every subject, because it doesn't matter what it is. As far as related to Trump, it seems like they jump on it and they report it as if he is like a Nazi leader
Mhm.
marching, migrants into extermination camps. And then you have other people like AOC parroting that sort of behavior
Mhm.
or those sort of talking points. And
Yeah.
so I have, over the last 4 years, every day that goes by, I'm just more and more like, I will not trust a single word that I hear in the media. And if I hear something, I have to check it with 3, 4 different sources. And ideally, or generally, I end up with an independent, smaller source to try to verify if what I'm hearing is true.
Yeah, I think something that I learned in college was media literacy, and I've got to thank my liberal brainwashing for that, right? And but no, I agree with you. There's two books that you need to read if you haven't read. Matt Taibbi's Hate Inc. Talks about the pretty much profit-driven media system ecosystem that we have. I mean, a good example, I think you and your last guest touched on this, was essentially how Facebook and social networks essentially, we found that we interact with things that piss us off more than anything. That's just human
Yeah.
nature, and Facebook has been capitalizing on that. The second book is Noam Chomsky's Manufacturing Consent, because ultimately that is what the media is trying to do. They're trying to manufacture your consent into putting you into illegal offensive wars, or tell you that's okay that we bailed out Wall Street, but we kicked out 5.1 million Americans out of their homes out of no fault of their own. And so I think Trump provided a easy mechanism for people to point to and blame.
Mm.
And I didn't vote for the guy, but I mean, if I'm able to see that, I think again it's that partisan rot. I think people disagree. Well, excuse me, I'm not sure if you can hear my son in the, in the other room
I
barking.
can't actually.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. I set up the studio to, be fairly insulative,
Uh-huh.
um, but yeah, no, but the media ecosystem is essentially they're not going to tell you, they don't want to talk to you about real things that address Americans' material well-being. They want to talk about, whether it's Dr. Seuss, or they want to talk about um, this is one that I am torn on as a former NCAA athlete. Transgenders competing against
Mhm.
women or men in amateur sports or professional sports.
Uh-huh.
But how does that address the economic and material well-being of Americans? It doesn't. You know. And instead of talking about things like wealth inequality, they want to talk to things that they know that generate clicks,
Yeah.
because whether it's economics or the former, I think we both know which one is a more spicy topic to cover. So,
Yeah. Just out of curiosity, what sport did you do?
I was recruited to Texas State University to run the 400 hurdles, and so I ran, I ran
Oh,
the 400 hurdles, and I didn't know which race was worse. And so, thankfully, I was fast coming out of a small town in Texas,
uh-huh.
uh, and they paid for my school, but but gosh dang, my junior year, they're like, hey, Will, we want you to go run the 800. Let's just see how you do. Let's just see how you do. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with like track times or whatnot. My first 800 I ran a 153. And in terms of like D1 collegiate level, that's subpar. That's not going to get you, into NCAA regionals. But
Okay.
that's enough to score points at conference, which matters to your scholarship. So,
Oh,
uh, yeah. So, either way, I've got to say, at the very least, I feel like it has been now, because I mean, these athletes coming out of high school or even just competing in college is amazing. Like it really is, and part of me wishes I went into. I wanted to be a hurdling coach, coming out of college, but I didn't and whatnot. And so I think the sport, I got great or good at the wrong sport because now, man, I have bad knees. On Monday, I'm actually meeting my orthopedic doctor to schedule a knee surgery. So,
oh wow. Okay. So would you say it's better to be a has been or a never was?
oh man, yes and no. On one hand, I'm paying the medical bills associated with the knee surgery, and on the other hand, I've made some of the best relationships and best friends on
Mm.
that track team, and I have some of the best memories. I'm not. Did you ever watch track or grow up watching track?
Not, I mean, if you say watching, like religiously watching, then no, but like I'm very aware of it. I've watched it occasionally in the Olympics, watched it, friends doing it through high school and whatnot. But, and
Yeah.
what's that famous hurdler's name? That girl, she's Australian girl that does the little dance.
Oh,
You must
I
know
know
her,
what you're
right?
talking about. I was about to say Lolo Jones, but I can't remember her name because I saw her everywhere, everywhere.
Yeah, I would
Whether
say she's my biggest introduction to hurdles because like I follow her on everything. So I'm just like
I'm
always seeing
not,
like how she's doing.
I'm not going to ask you why, but
I'm
I
really into hurdling.
yeah, there you go, there you go. But no, like I ran against some prominent Olympic athletes. Pretty much. Do you know Michael Johnson? He had the 400-meter record in 1996 there in Atlanta. And
Oh, okay.
so I ran against USA Olympic team gold in at a LSU track meet in 4x4. And one of them was the silver medalist from 2004 in Athens. And not to go off into the weeds in this, but this guy, there is a difference between a college athlete and an Olympic class athlete. I don't think a lot of people understand.
Uh-huh.
Like by the time I got the baton, so they front loaded the 4x4 at that meet. I was the slowest guy, so they put me as the anchor leg. Just full disclosure and whatnot. Whereas typically the thinking is you put the fastest guy on the anchor leg. Depends on what your guys are splitting.
Uh-huh.
By the time Jeremy Warner got the baton, and by the time I got the baton, the guy was like 80 meters away from me, man. And I was just like, he's going. Oh, he's going, man. He's never gonna stop. And it was funny because I didn't get tired on that 400. I remember that because I was so focused on catching him
Yeah.
that he made me compete even better. So, yeah, man, I'll never forget that, and I can't wait to tell my grandchildren about how I lost to Jeremy Warner at a LSU track meet in 2015. So
Yeah. I mean, I think it's better to have a story that you were there, you competed and lost rather than no story at all, right?
hmm
I think
but
so.
no, I agree, man. I agree, and I think people's stories, their personal stories. That's why I love talking to people. Why, whether it's you or whether it's just the common people that I want to sit and ask questions. Something that I found in that poll that I did
Hmm.
was people wanted to talk. That they felt that their politicians and congressmen and women just weren't listening to them. That
Hmm.
they had no one that they could pretty much, express their grievances to.
Hmm.
A couple weeks ago, I was up in Dallas, and or last week I was in Dallas, but I met up with some family friends I haven't seen in a long time, And they're asking me, "Hey, Will, how are you doing?" And just catching up because in coronavirus time doesn't exist because it was March 2020 yesterday. And
Yeah, yeah.
um, and I hadn't seen them since 2019. And so I didn't get to ask them, or I didn't, reach out to them to ask them the survey questions.
Uh-huh.
And my gosh, man, they just wanted to talk. They want. I swear, if I didn't end it after 45 minutes, because typically I will say this: the questions last about 30 minutes, but around that 45-minute mark to 1 hour mark, they start going off into the weeds away from my questions.
Uh-huh.
But but no, they wanted to actually sit down and talk about what was going on in their lives.
Hmm.
And whether it's people on the left or the right just not talking anymore, or in fact they're politicians becoming more and more out of touch with their constituents, the common people want to have a say in the way their lives are lived. That's what politics is. And when people they tell me that I'm not interested in politics,
Uh-huh.
well, it's like gravity. It doesn't care if you believe it or not. If you jump off that building, you're falling.
Yeah.
Politics is essentially the infrastructure in the way that you live your life. And whether it's from taxes to where you work and how you work, it doesn't matter. Politics has a hand in every part of your life. And I think, whether it's your show or mine, I think the biggest goal is that we need to get people involved into the political process.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know,
that's why I started doing this. I mean, I've been toying with it. I'm kind of a procrastinator. So like I've always been kind of motivated to make sure I achieve things, but I also procrastinate a lot. And I've been thinking about doing this for years, and I wish I would have started it 5 years ago, 6 years ago when I first had the thought. But I I just repeatedly like you're saying, you that people want to have their voices heard. I felt like I wanted to have my voice heard because I'm hearing things that just don't make sense to me, and I'm hearing things that seem like, well, you're only saying that because you don't know this. Like, and whether I'm ignorant to my own bias, I don't know.
mhm.
But I'm constantly hearing some things that just don't make any logical sense, and I've never sat down and talked to anybody where I share something with them that they didn't know, and it's like it where it blew up, or they weren't saying, "Oh, well, I didn't know that." And then
Mhm.
both of us can shape our opinions based on the new information that we're getting. But when you look online and you see the narratives going around, it's like, no, that idea is horrible. And there is no reason why that idea could be good. It doesn't make sense to me because, like I said, I've never had a one on one conversation with someone where it wasn't civil. And if they're saying something where I have information they don't accept that information and ponder on it, and same vice versa. They have information that I don't have. You've said a lot of things here today so far that I don't have information on, and I'm willing to accept that and bring that into my knowledge and then adapt my opinion. But it just kind of seems like people don't want to accept new ideas because there's so much online engagement instead of face-to-face engagement.
So there's a paper that I relatively know the title that I want to read, but I know the abstract of the paper. It was a 1996 paper, so it's scary that the predictions that they made. It's called cyber communities, or cyber balkanization. And I might have the title wrong, but I imagine if you put it into one of your monopolistic web search browsers, they'll be able to find it for you, right?
I go with DuckDuckGo.
Yeah. Hey, same here, same here. People look at my phone, they're like, "What the hell's there a duck right there on? Oh, that's DuckDuckGo."
Yeah, I
And
don't think I've ever mentioned DuckDuckGo and someone knows what I'm talking about. So
maybe they'll sponsor us. Maybe they'll
that'd be
sponsor.
great. I could use some sponsors.
Hey, keep doing it, man. You'll get there eventually. Trust me. I look like to touch on this. Joe Rogan started his podcast in 2010. I started listening to him. I might be off on the years, like 2009, 2010, right?
It was, yeah, yeah. I've looked at his first episodes, and hey, my first episodes are better than his. So
There you go, man. There you go. And so I think the biggest problem is that new podcasters face, including myself, is consistency. Sitting down and like editing, recording, finding people that actually want to sit and have a conversation. In the context of a pandemic, that made it extremely hard to bring guests into the studio and like, oh hey, let's have a conversation with like masks on and anything and
yeah,
whatnot.
for sure.
And but no, that going back to that paper predicted that the internet was going to bring a unintentional consequence. That we were going to be we were as people, whether it's Western Europeans, Russians, the Chinese are a different conversation. But industrialized nations that had access to the open internet, we're going to find like-minded communities,
Uh-huh.
and they are going to sit inside of their own bubbles. And so, that's problematic for a few reasons. One of them is that if I can't present my ideas to you and they don't hold water, well, my ideas aren't worth anything.
Yeah.
And on top of that, it creates this reinforcement feedback loop to where if I'm just talking to a bunch of lefties all day, granted, a lot of people actually disagree with me on the policy decisions that I would strive for. Um, that we're just going to be over here jerking each other off, and that's not good. That's
Yeah.
not good to a democracy, and that's not good to a society at large more than anything.
Yeah. It also gets
And
very messy.
mhm, yeah, oh, exactly. and,
I was taking that too literally. Sorry.
I haven't had enough of these yet.
But yeah, that's what happens with those echo chambers. And I've had so many discussions, before I started the podcast, a lot of discussions with people online where I end up getting blocked. And I'm not saying anything mean. In my opinion, I'm just giving what I deem as facts. I tend to rely on statistics, and then I
Mhm,
give my opinion based on those statistics. But it seems like people are so into their own world that they hear something on the outside and they blow a gasket. They don't necessarily know how to handle it. And then they'll just hit that block button and return to their bubble to where everybody agrees with them. And I think that is damning to them. I think it's damning to society in general that we're all receding into these echo chambers. And then when with censorship going on, you have these people that are saying, yeah, 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 censorship, kick these people out. Well, where are those people going to go? They're going to go somewhere, and they're going to start sharing their ideas in their little chamber where nobody can say anything against those ideas. So they can't fight bad ideas with good ideas because you've got this echo chamber of bad ideas where they get more and more radicalized. And then we don't even know who they are because they're not in the public anymore.
mhm. No, I agree. Can I rant about censorship for your second? Because
Absolutely.
I heavily disagreed with your last guest on the solution to, oh, you can't just get off of Facebook or stop eating Chick-fil-A
Uh-huh.
or get off of Amazon. That's honestly anti-American, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
So in 1896, the election between William Jennings Bryan and William McKinley was a pivotal election. The United States essentially was starting to show signs of going into a recession, which in fact turned into a Great Depression, as we all know, 30 years later. And essentially going off of the gold standard that people were asking for. They were like, hey, we got to get off this gold standard. This doesn't make any sense because people are hoarding gold and gold. And who was the president at the time? Calvin Coolidge. And so follow me here.
I'm
And
with
so
you.
so in the 1890s and in the late 19th and early 20th century, it was extremely common to not only find Marxists, socialists, communists, democratic socialists in places of power. Do you know where the birth of the labor movement was?
Mm-mm.
It was in Kansas. It was in Kansas. Unions are as American as apple pie and whatnot. And so you had William Jennings Bryan that was essentially castigated by the press that essentially was told, "Oh, he's a communist. He's insane." That was a big one that they always wanted to paint against him. That he was insane. That anyone who didn't want to come off the gold standard didn't have an economic education and therefore were psychologically inept.
Hmm.
And so the common man, I think, has a lot of wisdom that we don't acknowledge. And so ultimately, as we know, William McKinley won out because at the time the culture war was essentially, saying, "Hey, we don't need to come off the gold standard," and that the rising prices of corn isn't a problem, and the way bankers were screwing and arguably quote unquote raping farmers, wasn't a problem either. And so these problems bubbled. They continued to raise, and as we both know, after the Great War, World War I, I mean, shit got worse in the United States, and it's funny because history rhymes and repeats. So 20 years later, under President Wilson, he used the Espionage Act to pretty much ban any speech to talk about the Spanish flu. That's why the Spanish flu is the Spanish flu, because the Spanish press was the only ones that were reporting on it. When in fact, funny enough and ironic enough, Spanish flu started in Kansas.
Really, I didn't know that.
And so and through World War I, the United States military helped spread the Spanish flu H1N1
Mhm.
throughout Western Europe and whatnot.
Oh,
And
okay.
so, I mean, one, censorship was an extreme problem under the Wilson administration. That's extremely problematic. That you were viewed as anti-American and therefore subject to jail time if you even talked about the Spanish flu because it was anti-American.
Mhm.
And so we move forward, in time. The Great Depression. 10 years later, because the roaring 20s, you saw incomes rise, you saw quality of life rise. Well, as we all know, bankers on Wall Street were pretty much putting up stocks that had no value, and therefore pretty much everyone figured out, oh crap, all these stocks, whether it was public utility companies or whether it was Standard Oil, none of these have any value. And so in 1929, the market crashed. And so FDR, began campaigning, I believe, 1932 election and whatnot. And his mandate was that he was going to change structurally the economic system that the United States had. That the wealthy were, not only destroying the country, which they arguably did, but they were taking, their not their fair share. And so in 1932, when FDR won his presidency, I mean, he actually addressed the problems that the United States was facing. He arguably saved capitalism. Arguably saved capitalism, because imagine if he didn't, if he did nothing, the United States continued to go into, destitution and desperation.
Mhm.
What would those Americans do? They would become they would turn to robbing their neighbors, robbing stores. I can only imagine the atrocities. I mean, just think about Hoovervilles in 1930 and 31. These were slums that had malaria. A third world country disease. Rampant amongst these shanty towns. And so I'm relating this to now because Joseph Biden, our president, views himself as the new FDR, that he is going to structurally change the way things are in America. And I'm going to tell you, my listeners and your listeners, that's not true. He is not the FDR. He is not going to save us. Even though I agree with the American Rescue Plan I don't think it goes far enough, in fact. And we'll get into that, here later. But unionization in the United States in the early 20th century was, God, it was probably upwards of 70%. You know what it is now?
I don't.
13%.
Mhm.
It's absurd. and wages have stayed stagnant from the 1970s while productivity goes up. So something's wrong. Something's wrong. And to talk about the censorship aspect of it, I think Facebook, Amazon, Google, whatever tech monopoly, I could go into, Wall Street and the big banks and the financial sector, but there's something incredibly insidious about the tech monopolies because they control every aspect of our life. And to say to just leave Facebook, to just leave Amazon, hey, just get off Google, that is not a realistic solution. And in fact, you know who agrees with me?
Who's that?
One of the executives of Facebook. And in fact, not only the co-founder of Facebook agrees that we need to break up Facebook, but one of the current chief executive. I'm trying to think what his name was. I'm going to shoot you a link about the video. Even though it was recorded by Project Veritas, which I don't know if you're familiar with Project Veritas, they got one of Facebook's executives on camera admitting that, hey, yeah, we got to break this up. Like this is, clearly a monopolistic entity. Yeah. And the last 30 or 40 years of pretty much antitrust law has been, if it's good for the consumer, it's not a monopoly. And that's not true. That's not true because it is a policy failure when you have Facebook, Amazon, Google, or or Twitter, pretty much these unelected, executives and businesses that have there's no recourse for me to go to Mark Zuckerberg and say, hey, that's not right because I didn't elect him. Because it's a policy failure. It's a policy failure when a tech monopoly or a tech giant is essentially legislating the First Amendment. That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. And I mean, there's a reason why we broke up Standard Oil. That's a reason why we broke up the telecom companies, because the concentration of power that they held pretty much rivaled the United States. And at the time, FDR and his administration saw that. And every administration following, from FDR to Nixon, pretty much held really strong antitrust powers in their administrations. Mm-hmm. And so it is absolutely absurd to view yourself as a consumer first, which I'm not disparaging your last guess, and an American second. Sorry.
Right, so I'm kind of wondering, so you were saying that you kind of disagree with the last guest. So it was one of the things that he was saying, which I disagree with the outcome, but I don't necessarily disagree with the premise. And so what he was saying was, for anyone that didn't hear, was that basically you can just, if you're a libertarian or you support, which him and I are both kind of in the area of the libertarian, if you support free market and you support individual rights, then you would support their ability for them to have their own business, and they can do what they want with their platform, and then they can kick people off. So one thing we didn't get into with him was the difference between a platform and a publisher, which it seems those big social media corporations are kind of playing both sides of the fence as far as that goes. But you're saying that you disagree, and like I was saying, I disagree with the result of them censoring people and kicking them off. But I have trouble justifying an argument that says that they cannot do it because it is their own platform. And so as much as I disagree with their actions, they have the right to commit those actions in the same way that I would support, what was the ACLU before they fought for the right of white supremacists to have a march. And even though I would 100% disagree with that march, and I 100% disagree with all of those ideas, I would support the idea that everyone has the right to express themselves.
Oh, for sure. Let me ask you this simple question. Mm-hmm. Would you rather a President Joe Biden or a President Jeff Bezos?
Which one would I rather have?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think I know enough about Jeff Bezos to give an answer to that, but I know there's a whole lot about Biden that I really don't. like. And I don't actually think it's necessarily Biden. I think it's the situation that he's got himself into. And I mm, that's a hard question. I think it's mostly hard because I don't know Jeff Bezos enough. I really don't know enough about him.
Okay, well, you guys pretty much, replace Bezos with Zuckerberg or Dorsey or Sundar Pichai or, any of them. The reason I'm asking,
The problem is I have a very high amount of distrust for all of them, and I don't necessarily know what's worse.
yeah, I think it would be absurd for either of us to say that a president, Mark Zuckerberg, um, or in this case, I should have reframed the question because essentially right now you've got essentially two hegemonies competing against each other. You've got a rising hegemony in the global context between China and the United States, but the United States is dealing with an entire different problem of its own with these neo-feudal states like Facebook and private companies essentially ruling the way people rule and run their lives. And so I would rather have a duly elected Trump or Biden than I would to have to answer to a pretty much a faceless person that I don't even know, like, what his favorite color is, which I imagine I could look up Zuckerberg or Dorsey's favorite color, which I imagine they're blue. I don't know what's telling me that.
Well,
But no, these are unanswered. They don't answer to anyone. They, for whatever reason, they could kick you or I off of their platforms for just depending on the way that we voted, and that's problematic. They are essentially concentrating power and interpreting First Amendment legislation. Are you familiar with the Sherman Antitrust Act?
no.
And so the Sherman Antitrust Act was utilized as a tool by the FDR administration and every administration from between. I utilize these because I think this is where things start really going wrong is after Nixon. And so between, FDR, well, hell, you can even go to Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, the great trust buster, to where these people, at the hint of a concentration of power and wealth, they shut it down. They did not allow any concentration of power to rival the United States because they are not duly elected representatives of the people. Same thing with Facebook and Google. Their board members, they're not duly elected representatives. A bunch of them are a bunch of, neoliberals that, want market ideology to run everything. But I mean, you have in their own circles, they know that they are going to be broken up. I think a good example of this is Jeff Bezos stepping down as CEO because I think his role in the next 20, 30 years as the richest man on earth, whether it's him or Elon Musk, is going to be a very precarious role when the haves have way more, which they already do, than the have-nots. But essentially, I would rather the government actually do their fucking job and break these bastards up because everyone inside their companies knows they need to be broken up because they're legislating our Bill of Rights. Like, how is that okay? That's in my opinion anti-American. That there's we've got to rethink what it means to be patriotic, because I think whether it was COVID or really the last couple elections is that they showed that America's not number one anymore. We haven't been for a long time. And that American exceptionalism is not necessarily a myth, but it is more patriotic to show what you can improve on than just to say, hey, the way things are great. When one in three GoFundMe campaigns is for medical bills.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, no. Hey, I encourage you to look this up as well. It is devastating. When in May of last year, OnlyFans reported a 71% increase in subscribers. Man, like the economic situations of Americans is continuing to get worse. So, whether it is, concentration of, tech oligarchies and tech monopolies, or essentially all industries, coalescing together and challenging the power of our government. I would rather, whether I disagree with Biden or not, or disagree with Trump or not, I know a majority of Americans and my fellow Americans that I trust, to make their own decisions, elected these people in a democratic process, whereas Facebook, Twitter, and the lot are not.
Mhm. Um, when you pose the question with which president, if it's based on what we're dealing with now, then yeah, I would say an elected president. I wasn't. I was thinking like they
In
had
an actual
if they had
elected
been
body.
elected.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, obviously, someone that's not elected and just having the control that they have, then obviously I would choose the elected representative. But but what can we say? What would be a good argument for somebody? Because this is something that I struggle with as well, because I do lean on the libertarian side, and this is the same question I just kind of asked, and I guess I'm kind of reiterating it. Like, what can we actually say whether or not our belief is that it's wrong, but what can we say to justify telling a private business that the decisions they make within their own platform are not acceptable,
I
to
mean,
where they're forced to change? Like the only thing that I can think of is government intervention, and I'm very against government intervention. So is there any way to do that without government intervention?
I think we have to talk about what is the role of the state in people's lives and societies. And what I see currently is a neo-feudal state forming from these oligarchies, whether ranging from tech to agriculture, that are controlling people's lives. And I mean, historically speaking, we've told businesses they can't do what they want to do, for the last 150 years. And so it would not be out of the norm to go to Facebook, out of the norm to go to Twitter, out of the norm to go to Google and tell them, look, hey, y'all can't discriminate against people that don't, ideologically agree with y'all or have a viewpoint that is, out of the norm. If we're talking about, people that, believe A, taxation is theft, or B, like, these fringe ideas, that there is a certain ethnicity that's running everything. Yeah, I don't think that, they have any place on in the public. But the thing is, we can shine light on these. Put their ideas out there in the marketplace of ideas if you want to talk about the marketplace. And so I think historically speaking, we've told businesses that they can't do certain things because it's anti-democratic and it's essentially has a deleterious effect on society, which I think we're currently seeing now with the hyperpartisanship on both the left and the right.
Mm-hmm. Mm. Okay, I mean that makes sense. I guess I just struggle with the idea that something, just because we've done something in the past, would open the door to, hey, we've done it before, let's do it again.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of how what you're saying kind of reads in my mind. And like, even though I agree with you, I'm also torn because I would prefer change for the better, which I guess, in my opinion, for the better, that uh, the government doesn't have any power to tell anyone necessarily how to run their business. And then, people can take examples of this and say, well, if they didn't do that, think about civil rights and how, they forced change and whatnot. Like I get that argument, but in 2021, I guarantee if a business opened that said whites only, it'd be out of business pretty quick.
For sure.
So I think the market would absolutely kill those sort of bad ideas. Um, and I would love the fact if it would be, as easy as, okay, let's leave the platform. But like you're saying, it's so massive. It's just not as simple as let's go to another platform. And, like I mentioned in the last podcast that, they tried to do that with Parler and they got kicked off the servers and they
Yeah.
had to find, a new way to even get online. So I don't know. I'm just torn with it. And I like the conversation and I appreciate the ideas. It's
Oh,
just
for
hard for
sure.
me to reconcile with.
I think there's two things. One, we bring back the Sherman Antitrust Act. Any business that's participating in monopolistic, anti-competitive behaviors, which all tech monopolies are doing, as we know, we break them up. Second, we do repeal Section 230. We pretty much ban them from, hey, Y'all want to
Yeah.
actually act as a publisher and a platform at the same time? Get out of here. All right,
Yeah.
and then three, there's something else that we have to do: term limits. And four would be a subsection, I guess, or 3A is banning this, regulatory capture that we have in our government. You've got the um, pretty much people that go work for Amazon, that go work for Facebook, and then you know where they're working at next? The White House. And then after that, they go back to the private sector. Like that's absurd, And a majority of Americans want this, and it's not happening. I know why it's not happening because they make the rules. They're not gonna limit their power and
Mhm.
whatnot because it's become this symbiotic relationship between business and government.
Yeah.
Not even business and government, monopolies in government, and it's a bleak outlook. It really is. It really is. So I think that those three or four things, if we do those things, I think we'd be set on a better path. But if we do nothing, if we choose to keep going down the road we're going, it is going to get worse. If you think January 6th was bad,
Hmm.
I think things will continue to get worse in the United States of America.
Hmm. What do you think people can do, like you know, for that 230? What can people do to try to step forward and say, hey, this is not okay? Like, what is steps that we can all take to try to get that repealed and get it out of there so that these platforms can't argue both sides and then get away with the stuff they're getting away with?
Call your congressman, honestly. Pretty much, boy, it's going to take a new labor movement in the United States, honestly. I think we're starting to see that in small sections, whether it's, the Bessemer, Alabama, they're voting to unionize there at their plant. Or second, making more people aware, and I think a lot of people aren't aware of Section 230 because when was that legislation passed? In like 97, and,
Yeah, I'm not sure when.
it's there's a because I can't reiterate this enough because doing nothing is worse than doing something and whatnot. It is going to get bad. It is going to get bad if we choose not to repeal Section 230. If you don't, hey, it starts in conversations like this, and it starts with conversations with your friends and family, telling them, hey, look, I saw that. I want to talk to you about something. What do you think about people getting removed off of social media platforms
Mhm.
for their viewpoints? And I'm not talking about the people saying these whether it's racist, bigoted, or xenophobic things on these platforms. I'm talking about people that are expressing their views that are getting, whether it's demonetized on YouTube or pretty much kicked off
Mhm.
of Twitter, and it's all problematic. It is extremely problematic because in the marketplace of ideas, I do believe that the better policy wins, and that is typically the most popular policy.
Mhm. Do you think that Trump should have been kicked off the platforms that he was kicked off of?
Man, I'll answer that real quick. Fuck no. That's absurd.
Mhm.
You're telling me the duly elected president of the United States, the most powerful nation on earth, can't speak his voice? And the funniest thing is, let's 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 compare it to this. Why do they have I don't even know if I can make the comparison given where you're at. But Mohammed bin Salman, I'll use that one. Mohammed bin Salman, who is responsible for the Yemen genocide right now, or killing Jamal Khashoggi. You know, hell, Saudi Arabia. What is it? 8 of the 11 9/11 hijackers were from Saudi Arabia and whatnot. And these people can have a voice and have a say on their platform.
Mhm.
That's absurd. That's absolutely absurd. And what he said, like, what did he get kicked off for? I don't remember.
Well, he got kicked off and then he came back on and then he said something else and got kicked off again. But it was basically talking about the election being stolen and repeatedly saying that that was true. And then I don't know if the January 6th hadn't happened, maybe that magnified it and they say, oh, well, he's responsible for what's the word that they use?
Insurrection.
Yeah, Yeah, that and his rhetoric is dangerous and this and that, and it caused all this stuff to happen. I, eh, but at the same token, he came on. So his second video before, uh, when he got back on and he posted the next video, he's telling people to go home peacefully, and he did say, "Oh, we love you, but go home." And I was kind of astonished when I was listening to it. And I was waiting for the thing that, like the big trigger moment, and I just never saw it. And then when I went through and I read the speech, I listened to the speech, or what people said about the speech, and then I went and read the speech. I was kind of astonished that the label that he was being blamed, and I don't know, you might disagree with me for this. I don't know, but I didn't see anything in that speech that was any different than the rhetoric coming from Congress and other politicians every single day saying fight for this. And the fact that he even said peacefully and patriotically kind of like threw out like all unknowns for me. It's like, okay, well, you even said peacefully and patriotically march and let your voices be heard. I think that's almost the exact quote that he made in that speech. And then being kicked off social media, coming back on, and then saying that yes, everything was stolen, but we need to move on, go home, this and that. And then he's booted off everything. And obviously, I'm paraphrasing here because I can't memorize it exactly what was said, but I was kind of astonished by all of it.
So, but I know. So, talking about January 6th,
Mhm.
do you are you familiar with the Air Force veteran Ashley Babbitt who was killed?
I'm not.
Um,
I'm not very. I read some things, but again, I don't trust anything I read without looking into it, and I didn't further look into it. So, the
yeah.
stuff that I read was kind of negative stuff about her and her ideology and her beliefs. And I'm sure that I don't even remember where I got it from, but I don't let that hold any weight because I just don't trust any outlets I read stuff from.
Yeah, no, you can look this up too, because I've been doing pretty much a lot of reading and writing on, the last 30, 40 years in the United States. Why have we got to the point that we've got, and why are Americans, storming the capital of the United States? The last time that happened was when, the Redcoats came over and burned
Mhm.
our state house down. And what has happened for them to make these decisions, and it all goes back, it all goes back, to their economic situations typically, and then pretty much they feel that things are, becoming more and more existential in their lives. Ashley Babbitt was an Obama voter in 2012, and I believe in 2008 she voted for Obama as well. How does someone
That's
go?
something I never even heard. So
Yeah.
just
So
goes.
how does someone go from voting for Obama, feeling hope and change,
Mhm.
to not? And I believe in 2013 she had lost her business. 2013, 2014 she lost her business after years of the financial crisis, and Wall Street just getting away with doing what they do every 7 years, right?
Yeah.
And so Ashley Babbitt, an Air Force veteran, for all intents and purposes, I would say a Democrat, given that she voted for Obama.
Mhm.
She storms the Capitol. What's 6 years later and whatnot, and that's extremely problematic. That's extremely problematic.
Yeah.
And in Trump's speech, at first when I had heard it, I do think his speech was problematic.
It was inflammatory, but I don't think what we can say if we're going to hold people accountable for every inflammatory thing they say, there's a whole lot of congressmen that need to be locked up.
mhm.
So, yeah,
What?
sorry to interrupt you.
No, no, no. You're fine. You're fine. I agree. I think, however, these people that have I'm going to call them brainwashed. I do believe QAnon conspiracy theories has brainwashed a lot of people
Yeah.
because they're desperate.
Yeah.
They have nowhere else to turn to, nowhere else to go because their economic situation for the last 10 years has gotten worse. In the last 20 years, it's continued to gotten worse, and their opportunities and their real wage income has gone down. They continue to get worse and worse health care. They continue to pretty much their taxes go into this black hole, and they don't see anything for it because their infrastructure is failing. And so, Donald Trump, I do think his speech was problematic. I'm torn on whether to call it, insurrection like speech. Um, I do think, he does hold some responsibility. I'll agree with Mitch McConnell on on something for once in my life.
Mhm.
Um, you know, to go as far as impeaching the guy again, I don't think that does nothing to help and boost the social cohesion of Americans in our country.
Mhm.
Because things have become more and more partisan. However, what is the solution? Because I mean, you've got pretty much senators like Ted Cruz. Unfortunately, that's my senator, and Josh Hawley, which I love Josh Hawley, by the way, on certain things. I mean, him and Bernie Sanders have a lot of overlap than they do, especially when it came to stimulus checks. With the second round of the CARES Act, if it wasn't for those two, Americans earning under $75,000 or $80,000 wouldn't have gotten a stimulus check if it wasn't for those two.
Mhm.
Um, However, with them, constantly saying the election is rigged, the election is rigged, the election is rigged. I'm not going to go as far as saying they're gobbles and saying if you say a lie enough, it becomes the truth. But I mean that does have an impact on the psyche of Americans, and they're going to continue to repeat that. And
Yeah.
so I don't know what the solution was because ultimately, I mean, let's be honest. They needed 17 Republicans to come over on the side of conviction. And so, what do you do when you convict, a president of insurrection on the merits?
Mhm.
On the merits of it, I do agree that hey, if we are going to start holding people accountable for not only political speech but also inflammatory speech, we need to do it across the board because I think that's something that's problematic. Is that a majority of Americans, whether on the right or the left, feel like they're not that our politicians are hypocrites and that people are hypocrites. Well, hey, so and so said fight for this. I know the most common one that came out was Kamala Harris saying, we're going to continue to fight, and they're going to continue. I think in the context of the George Floyd riots, they're going to continue to, be out there burning shit down and, destroying businesses. And so that's problematic. We need to pretty much have a standard, and we need to hold every leader to this standard. We can't just decide.
Yeah.
But when does that start? Does that start with the second impeachment of Donald Trump, or do we hold someone else accountable when the next time comes around?
Do you think there's a difference between? So one of the conflicts that I had was I have trouble separating the fact that when from the time that Trump was elected, almost for four years straight, even 2 weeks before the election, Hillary was still saying that she had the election stolen from her. And then we have numerous situations and uh, trials, I guess you'd call it, with the Russian situation and saying that the Russians helped Trump win the election. So where do you draw a line between that there is a sorry, my dog is on me again. Uh, do you draw a line in that there's a difference between Trump saying, "Hey, this election is stolen," and for the last 4 years, people on the left saying that it was stolen in a different way from them? Because to me, it's like potato. It's okay. He's saying that it was stolen through this election process, but you guys are saying it's stolen because of foreign agents and blaming Trump at being a foreign asset. And Hillary's repeatedly for 4 years saying that it was stolen from her, but nobody's, if an extremist from the left happened to go crazy, which we have seen this happen when AOC said that, the migrant, the ICE was comparing ICE to Nazis and and concentration camps. And then Bernie Sanders saying that Republicans were basically, I can't remember exactly what he said, but I'm going to paraphrase here. So correct me if you know I'm wrong, but saying something about Republicans not caring if people die because of health insurance issues. And then we have the Bernie Sanders supporter going and shooting up the congressional baseball game. So you have stuff like that happening. Uh, but I don't see an equal outlook
Yeah.
towards those sort of events. But Trump now, for a few months, says, hey, there was fraud in the election, and I believe it was stolen. And suddenly he's responsible for any insurrection that happens from that point.
Hmm. So I think one we do need to we've got to go through a timeline of this, so to say. So in 2016, um, people pretty much all the polls predicted correctly that Hillary would win the popular vote, which she did.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they got wrong through the electoral college, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so in 2016, people began asking themselves, why would anyone vote for a reality TV show star versus a elder stateswoman in a national election? And they wanna they wanna make it to where it wasn't their fault, that it wasn't their fault that they lost the election, that it was Russian agents, it was the Iranians, it was anyone else. And yes, there was election interference to where there's disinformation campaigns, there's by Vladimir Putin, or even the Iranians and another group that I can't say, and to not recognize that would not be giving the whole picture. And
Uh-huh.
so these policy decisions over the last 30, 40 years, I think, I mean, again, Americans have become even more desperate. The debt load of household incomes, or median household incomes, has continued to rise. I think it stagnated in 2018, 2019. And I mean, people's opportunities and their outlooks have become more and more bleak and nihilistic. And again, like I mentioned that stat earlier, only 13% of Americans feel that they're engaged and valued at their workplace.
Uh-huh.
And that's a problem. That's a huge problem, And we're going amongst the greatest transformation of our workplaces. It's the fourth industrial revolution. And so let's go back 4 years, when Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton were running. And I voted for Bernie. I did. Hell, I voted for him in this last one. And the reason being is because, I mean, if you told me, in the year 2000, let's look at the year 2000, George Bush and Al Gore, two establishment candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Let's fast forward 16 years. I don't think Donald Trump was a populist candidate because he didn't follow through on any actual popular legislation, but a faux populist. But you have two populists in the race. That says something. That really does. That, I mean, whether you disagree with them or not, hey, they actually say what they mean and they mean what they say. And that's what they saw in candidates like Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. And that's, why I have, a lot of respect for both of them. And so Hillary Clinton and Clintonism, she viewed it as her losing the election was a repudiation of her and her husband and essentially her entire, Democratic establishment. Because how does someone, a Vermont senator, rival someone who's been in politics for what, 30, 40 years, if not longer? And shit just hasn't changed, right? And so let's fast forward, through 2016 to 2020. As we both know, the media pretty much capitalized on, demonizing Trump. And whether it was for good or bad is a different discussion. But I mean, just look at the current stats. Pretty much 43% of viewership has gone down across the board in CNN, MSNBC, and whatever other mainstream media news network, because they are floundering to
Mm-hmm.
find anything to demonize Biden on. It's kind of hard. The guy's pretty milk toast, right? And and, and it's an indictment of the establishment of how they've been running the country, because the experts, the people that apparently, oh god, apologize, the experts, the experts have been running the show, well, they continue to fuck shit up. They continue to be bulls in china shops that have real consequences. You can literally see, and I know correlation doesn't equal causation, but from the 1981 Reagan tax cuts all the way to 2016, you have this downward trend. You know when deaths of despair start rising?
No.
In the 90s, and they continue to rise from 99 to present. And so you've got the tax burden on our top income earners, going down when I pay a higher effective tax rate than Jeff Bezos. I believe I pay, was it 24.2%, and he pays 23.1%. These problems continue to compound. And I think people actually want structural change, and that's what they saw in Donald Trump. They wanted change because these politicians that have been in power again have been screwing them over. They've been, robbing them out from the back door while distracting them with these culture war issues that honestly don't affect their material well-being. And I do think that there are, culture war issues that matter, but I think if you do solve the economic issues, they will then in turn improve the material well-being and the lives of Americans. And so Trump gets elected in 2017, 2018, 2019. I mean, he did anything what any establishment Republican would do. Fucking tax cut, right? and so I think 2020 and 2020 was essentially, if COVID didn't happen, I honestly believe that Donald Trump would be the president of the United States right now. And I mean, he said it himself best. You want to know who got robbed of the election? He said it. He says it a million times. Bernie Sanders. Because I mean, there's a really good book that I just started reading this last week. It's called Lucky, the presidency of Joe Biden, how he barely scraped by his teeth. Because what Democratic candidate has won, the first three primaries and has not become the president?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And so
a lot of really weird. I mean, this kind of goes back to Trump's accusations and stuff a lot as well. There was a lot of things that happened for the first time that didn't align, and I didn't know we were going to be talking about this, so I didn't prepare them. I can't remember everything, but there was a lot of firsts as far as like losing seats, and then he underperformed in like almost every area of Obama except in swing states, where in those particular places he way overperformed in just the right locations. And so for a lot of people, that's suspicion, like, okay, well, going with that, and then suddenly overnight, I'm sure all the accusations and whatnot, and you see the graph with Biden suddenly taking the lead. You see people like these sort of things lead people to have their beliefs of what happened or what right or wrong or whatnot. And so there was a lot of small things. And then with all the law changes beforehand, which, I don't know if you're familiar with the Time Magazine article, the secret campaign to save the 2020 election. Are you aware of that article?
No, tell me about that.
It's really interesting. Actually, I did an episode with a buddy of mine, and we kind of we had this agenda. We're like, okay, let's go through this article, let's break it down. And we tried the first time, we got completely sidetracked, went down a rabbit hole, and was like, okay, let's go for it again the next day. And then still, there's just so much to talk about when you start reading through this article, that we just couldn't get through it. And then we planned to go back to it, and we didn't quite get to finish it. So we kind of just rushed through it at the end. But basically, this article is talking about this plan to make sure that they can save the election by making sure that Trump lost. And it goes through a lot of strategies used to change laws before the election and get corporations and people on board with all coming together, which on one hand, if you're on the left, I get the arguments. Okay, well, this is just how campaigning works, and you're following the law. No one broke any laws. But then on the other side, if you had Trump saying, if these same accusations were pulled against Trump, and it was saying, oh, well, he rounded up people, and through his power and intimidation, he was able to get laws changed. And so they changed the rules of the game that made it more likely that he could win, I guarantee there would be numerous investigations into him and how his abuse of power and all kinds of things if you had people within his campaign doing this. So I'm butchering it a bit. You'd have to go in and read it. It's kind of long, but it's very interesting to read through in the way that they did it. And it talks about with all the riots in the summer, that they had the ability to call on these riots to happen, and they had them ready to go during the election. And that's why suddenly during these 3 days of wait time, suddenly riots, everything just suddenly stopped because they have everybody on hold. And I was astonished that I was reading this. And so that to me says, okay, these riots that happened all year that are claiming there is no power structure, there isn't a actual organization leading all of this. And you have some people saying Antifa doesn't exist, ideas, it's just an idea, it's not a real thing. But you have the situation where you've got someone in power that is able to say, I'm going to send this message. And if I send this message, then we go out and we protest. But they did not do it during this time because they didn't want to risk riots, because they know every time they do it, it turns into riots.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, I'm just kind of connecting the dots. That means as you have these things happening, you're willingly saying that if you had lost, you'd push this button, you send out this message to these people that you know are going to go just destroy cities, causing billions of dollars in destruction, causing death, police deaths, civilian deaths, but you're going to do it because you lose. It is very telling, and you'd have to go read it and to get what I'm talking about, because I'm obviously being very vague and going through it quickly, but
No.
I was shocked when I read it. It's, to me, if this article had come from any area on the right or anyone on that side, there would be outrage about the corruption built into the system and how they changed the rules of the game to ensure that Trump would win. But instead, it was on the left. And so the media ran with it as this saved the election to make sure it was honest and secure, which I thought was very corrupt, in my opinion.
Yeah, man, I think simply people wanted Trump to be presidential in one of the most, dire moments. I honestly think that his handling of COVID was, I'm not one of those lefties that said, like, oh, he's not, doing enough, like, late in the game. There's a good book that I encourage you to read. It's The Great Influenza. It talks about the Spanish flu pandemic. And Get Well Soon is another one that talks about epidemics and pandemics, throughout time.
Mm-hmm.
And back, you can ask anyone that knows me the way I was acting in December about COVID. Once a certain country started welding people into their homes, I was like, Jesus Christ, like, guys, this is bad. If you've ever seen Contagion, it is, like, that movie actually disturbed me back. That movie came out back in 2011. It's essentially, what there was a modern Spanish flu like, virus that, became a global pandemic and had the same, mortality rate and the same virulency as, the Spanish flu. And, from the beginning, I was saying, hey, all countries need to lock down their borders. Nobody needs to be doing international travel. We need to start a mass testing, program in the United States. We need to start manufacturing all these things. Mm-hmm. And something that COVID showed is that the United States doesn't make a fucking thing anymore. And we essentially rely on a certain country for manufacturing these goods. And that's bad for national security. And so I think honestly, I think simply put, Trump lost because of COVID. I really do. Like, I think, whether it was my small survey or any surveys of, his handling of COVID, a majority of Americans wish he would have done more and done more sooner. And I don't think the mainstream media was fair because, on one hand, as we both know at the beginning, they were calling him a racist and a xenophobe for, cutting off travel to countries, which these identitarians, as I call them, that's all they fucking care about. Yeah. And on the other hand, I mean, people don't look at these things from an objective viewpoint. It only makes sense to do that. If anyone studied, pandemics and epidemics throughout history, I mean, Look at cholera in London. That was horrible. Look at tuberculosis, typhus. Spanish flu is the most popular one. You know how many people, if Spanish flu happened today, you know how many people it would killed?
I don't. Probably a
A
lot.
hundred, 150 million people. And this is not to discredit COVID. My mother got COVID in October, and actually in August, she was, hospitalized for God, 44 days. There
Wow.
for a second, I was, faced with the mortality of my parents.
Yeah.
And that's something that us as children will always have to go through. But I can't imagine, the 2 million, it's like 2.6 million worldwide that have had to say goodbye to their friends and family. And hindsight is 2020. Of course, it's easy for me to sit here and say that we could have done more, which I know we both know we could have. But I think the system structurally is where the sickness lies. It's not profitable to store and house masks and ventilators and testing kits. It just, the profit motive just isn't there for these companies to do. And so I think something that does need to be fixed is, hey, pandemics and epidemics will happen. It's a guarantee. It's happened all throughout time, from the Justinian plague to COVID-19.
Yeah.
And it should be a part of national security, because it destroys economies. It wrecks them, and it not only kills people, but the long term health effects are going to make healthcare costs go up for for millions of people that not only get it, but that also die and whatnot. And so I think Trump lost because of COVID. I really do. Like I think the Heritage Foundation did a really good study on voter fraud. You're more than likely, and they're a conservative think tank in Washington. They found that you're more than likely to get struck by lightning than voter fraud to actually happen, because voter fraud is something that is measurable, is something that we can catch. Um, and I think when I talk to my dad is a right wing, Bill O'Reilly. He was a Ted Cruz. He was a Ted Cruz Republican, and then he became a Trump Republican.
So
And
do you know the I'll do it live.
um,
I'll do it
fuck,
live.
fuck it, I'll do it live. I love that. I
Right when
love
Bill
it.
O'Reilly is the first thing I go to. I'll do it live.
And and yeah, and so my father is a truck driver. My grandfather was a truck driver, and my great grandfather was a truck driver. Both my grandfather and great grandfather were Teamsters. They were in unions. My father isn't. My father makes a really good living. He makes six figures driving a truck. However, let me ask you this: you think in 20 years you'll be able to drive a truck for a living?
I would say no.
Exactly. And
Much less
so
than 20 years, I would think, based on where it seems automation is going. But
Exactly. And so I think that our economy is changing so fast. If you would have asked me if I could talk to a person in China, and actually have a one on one discussion with them, when I was a kid, that was something that I would have to go and do. Like, I would have to fly to China, and then we would have to sit and,
yeah,
have a whole production set up and do. If you told me that I had more computational power in a little black brick than pretty much the Challenger spaceship, oh, I would have been, hey, you're smoking something. We are living in the future. We're
yeah,
living in a time of Bitcoin and NFTs. We're living in a time of electric vehicles, and the economy is changing, and most importantly, that is going to undermine the working class. I think there are actual policy solutions to address the material well-being, because do you know what the top 5, 6 jobs in the United States are?
the top 5 or 6 jobs in the U.S. I mean, I assume they must be trade jobs, right? But I'm not sure which ones.
Cashiers.
Oh,
Cashier, I believe, is the number one job and whatnot. And that
yeah.
is, let's be honest, we're seeing.
Well, that's
I had
completely automated almost. Like it's the closest one to being completely automated.
Exactly. And then if you continue to go down, it's more, service, sector jobs that are going to be automated out of existence. I think number 5, 6 is a retail associate, and it's bad news. It's bad news because we're not doing anything to actually address it. Because if you ask me in 2016, if something that I learned about in college, which when I learned it in college, it was called unconditional basic income, but has now been popularized by not Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang. Would actually I would see in my lifetime, I wouldn't believe you. But the Overton window has shifted so much that it is the most popular policy, and I think modern American legislation. The direct payments, the stimulus checks, are the most popular legislation. And hell, Donald Trump, I'll give him credit on this. Hell, he wanted $2,000 checks, real $2,000 checks, not 600 plus 1,400. Um, and 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 there's that's the thing that I don't think a lot of liberals, leftists, whatever you want to call them, partisans, I think is the easiest way to describe them.
Yeah.
Give him credit on is that he had a really good political compass. He knew what the people wanted. He wanted to get us out of Afghanistan and Iraq, but unfortunately, he listened to the generals and the military-industrial complex to keep him in Syria, to keep him in Iraq and Afghanistan, when a majority of people don't want us over there. I don't want us over there because, our tax dollars are going, pivoted from that to where it could be actually, we could see something, materially here. Hell, I think the lower estimates of the war in Iraq and Afghanistan are as low as $100 billion and upward estimates of $3 trillion, and that alone, could pay for rebuilding our infrastructure. And I think people are starting to say, hey, they're starting to ask these questions. Why are we there? Because you've got fathers who were there in 2003 and their sons are going in the same route. And that's there's something wrong. And if we analyze this, that a lot of my research, unfortunately, is the two hegemonies in the world right now, the United States and China. And so, currently speaking, we are in what's called a Thucydides Trap, where essentially, how does the ruling hegemony respond to the rising one? And what a lot of my contemporaries don't know is that, hey, China's economy is actually larger than ours when measured in PPP, purchasing parity power. And I don't know if you know what that is or if your listeners know what that is, but I'll explain it briefly. You have a basket of goods in a country. So let's say hamburgers, TVs, computers, etc. And you have the same basket of goods in, let's say, just the United States. If we compare the two, China has a larger purchasing power parity than the United States. And so, one, they already have, metrics larger than ours. And what does that mean to Americans that, have, been, I'm going to say, brainwashed into American exceptionalism? That America is the number one country in the world. When we rank, where do we rank on the Freedom Index? I think it's number 25. We rank, like I was saying earlier, number 11 in healthcare outcomes, and then number 1 in cost. We continue to rank in the bottom, quartiles in education and whatnot. And it's not that I'm over here, just saying this to disparage my country. I love my country. I think it's the most patriotic thing to see what I can improve on in my country. And to say we can't do anything, that we've got to demonize Trump, that we've got to demonize Bernie Sanders, or just demonize anyone that actually want to change the status quo, is extremely problematic. And it's these conversations just aren't happening enough, because these Americans in the working class are going to get left behind. The number one indicator of your income potential is a 4 years bachelor's degree, and that's just the truth. and it's extremely it's very it's extremely problematic when the not only is that the number one indicator of not only who you're going to vote for, how much money you're going to earn, but essentially, where you're going to end up in life. And the cost of college has become more and more and more expensive. Hell, when I was in college, when you were in college, it's gotten more expensive, man.
Yeah.
And we're and this is what I was talking about in that email when I say we're Americans are feeling that the American dream is becoming more and more out of reach.
Uh-huh.
Let me ask you this: what do you define as the American dream?
Actually, this is one of the things that I have listed that I wanted to ask you about, and I think that maybe we'll disagree a little bit on this because I see the American dream as having the potential or unlimited potential, and so an individual does not have barriers in front of them that prevents them from being able to strive for their dreams. Not everybody obviously is going to reach the point that they want to get to, but there isn't necessarily something built into the system, a law or a regulation that stops them from being able to pursue those things. So I was a little bit not necessarily surprised because I think I hear this a lot, but that the American dream is not what it's made out to be, which I think there's some truth to that, but that it can't necessarily be achieved. But it seems like most times that argument is made, it's kind of made through anecdotal uh, assertions rather than looking at the summation of everybody and saying, okay, well, you can absolutely start at the bottom and you can end up being a billionaire.
Mhm. No, I think that's fair. However, I don't think that's yes, anecdotal. There are anecdotal stories of what can people can and can't achieve, but the more that we put our system under a microscope, economic freedom. I think we rank six out of top 25 nations and whatnot. Um, the number one indicator again is the education level that you achieve is going to be how much income potential that you have. What's sad is the majority of my friends that graduate college are not using their degree, whether they're STEM majors or whether they're the gender studies majors.
I was just going to say, are they gender study majors?
And so I think there's definitely we put this under a microscope. More and more Americans are becoming more and more desperate, whether they're in the working class or they're trying to work their way into the middle class. Education has become so expensive that it's become a poll tax to being a top income earner and whatnot. Why is education becoming more expensive? It's not like knowledge has gotten any better in the last 20 years.
Well, I
So
could give my opinion as to why, which I
tell,
what's that?
tell me, I want to know.
I mean, from my understanding, and sorry, I'm not going to cite anything when I go through this, but my understanding is that when education became a thing that was government funded, so it's like, oh, we're going to give you loans and able to go, then the cost of school shoots up because now you have government paying for school. You have all kinds of different methods that students are using to get funding to go to school. If that didn't exist and students were simply responsible for their own education, there's no possible chance that these schools would be able to charge the amount they charge because they would completely collapse because no one would be able to go. It's too expensive for an individual to pay. But if you're able to get these loans and the government sponsoring the loans, then it allows them to slowly boost the price over and over because you say, oh, well, we've got daddy paying for everything.
Yeah. Yeah. No, tuition costs have increasingly gone to facilities. And I was one of the few that was able to take advantage of these new, $600 million facilities that these universities are building. And so it's essentially become an entertainment venue. How do we get more alumni back here to contribute dollars to our universities And yeah, no, I think that we do need to address the government-backed loans, but not that's not only inflating it, but essentially these institutions that are building these lavish and luxurious, whether it's football stadiums, track stadiums, rec centers, all this other extraneous bullshit that does nothing to actually, go towards your education. And so, I mean, I've had this little tickle in the back of my throat now for the last day. Maybe I got COVID. I hope I don't. you know, um,
Hopefully not. I won't make any jokes about it.
man, if I do, I swear I'm gonna shoot you an email and be like, hey, you got to go get quarantined now.
Might have come
but
through the mic.
oh, yeah, exactly. But I mean, you know, if we strictly talk about potential of becoming a billionaire
Hmm.
and not addressing the basics, because I agree that yes, in the United States I have the potential to become a millionaire and a billionaire. That's great. That's awesome. However, the basics in the United States aren't covered. Whereas in whether it's countries like China, whether it's countries Australia, New Zealand, Western Europe, United Kingdom, the basics are covered for them. They typically these in these other countries they enjoy. Uh, they have it's gross domestic happiness. It's this new metric that's been touted for the last 10 years, and how we're measuring how people are becoming more
That must
holistic.
be a poll, right?
Man, I'm gonna find the stat for you and whatnot. But typically speaking, most of people in other countries are happier than Americans.
Let me give my opinion on that really quick because I went through some of these polls and I was like, man, this is astonishing. America sucks. Like, but when I started going into it and reading a bit more about it, and it kind of discounted all of these polls because I got an example that I was reading, and let's just say on Hocus Pocus Island. Okay, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna make up something, not to disparage anybody, but just made up island, whatever. They have an individual that they believe has magical powers, and that individual does their best to make sure that everybody's staying healthy. And for the most part, their community is healthy.
No.
So if you go to that community and you say, "How is your health care?" and they say, "Well, this witch doctor over here is keeping us healthy, and he does a magic spell whenever we get sick, and we usually get healthy. It's not very often that we die from the sickness until we're, of age or something like that. We die at old age." And so this community has a poll. Oh, well, 9 out of 10 are happy with their healthcare. To me, that means nothing because they're happy with their healthcare means they're happy within the situation that they're in. But if they were to suddenly experience something completely different, and they'd say, "Oh, wow, our healthcare was really bad before," if that makes sense.
Yes and no. Man, the healthcare reform, whether you want to go to a Singapore model or to a NHS model like the UK. Dig the goblet, by the way.
Thank you. It broke this morning. You can see
oh,
that's
son
why
of a.
that's why I was late this morning. I turned my chair and it knocked it off the table and it broke in half. And I was like, oh, and then my drink spilled on my keyboard. My keyboard quit working. So I've
Yeah.
been like airing it out because I couldn't get my stuff to work. So I was suddenly delayed by like an extra 30 minutes.
Mhm.
Sorry for the side trip.
No. You're fine. You're fine. But I think all stats. The thing about stats is, I can say all these numbers and essentially they have no meaning to your listeners. It is a bipartisan issue here in the United States that we need to fix our goddamn healthcare system. It is absurd. It would be absurd for anyone to tell me that we do not have a profit driven healthcare system when I can drive 150 miles to Mexico to get the same medications for pennies on the dollar, and then or go back to Texas and get the same medication for whether it's dozens of dollars or hundreds of dollars, or go on a trip to Spain for a week and get not only the same cost of a knee surgery, um, but I get to enjoy Spain and whatnot. I'm not sure if they're allowing Texans back in into the country, given us lifting mask mandates and whatnot.
Yeah.
But the problem is that more and more Americans are feel and rightly so that our healthcare system is it's a racket, is a profit driven system that not only we get worse healthcare outcomes, but it costs more. Whether you nationalize our healthcare system or you go to the Singapore model, which is actually a libertarian, market-driven system that pretty much pits public hospitals or public institutions against private institutions. Whatever the way we could drive healthcare costs down, it is absurd that healthcare costs in the United States, bankrupt families and loved ones in this country. I think so. The top three classifications of debt in the United States: number one is mortgages, number two is student loans, and number three is medical debt. And medical debt is something that's unheard of in other industrialized nations.
Mhm.
And I don't think it's an insane idea to guarantee, healthcare as a human right. I really don't. Seeing whether it's my mom, be dipped into hundreds of thousands of dollars into medical debt, or stories like I met a friend of my dad's a few weeks ago, and he just got cancer again. He was in remission for 3 or 4 years. Cancer came back, and to even start the chemo treatment, he needed $8,000. That was pretty much the deductible that he had to meet.
Wow.
Who do you know has $8,000 on them? You know, the average American can afford a $400 emergency expense.
Yeah.
Like,
What is it, like 70%? I don't remember the number now. It's been so long, but I feel like it was like 75% or something of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck or something,
yeah,
something like
yeah, yeah. No, it's in the 70th, if not 80th percentile.
Mhm.
And it's weird because when we look at median household income,
Mhm.
if I'm not mistaken, median household income in the United States is $65,000 and some change. If you could clarify, or if you could.
I feel like I just read something that said it was 80, but 80 sounded high. I'm trying to see if I've got a thing pulled up here on my screen, but I've just got you get so much stuff on your screen that you can't find anything. You're like, oh, I want this on my screen so I can find it, and then you put so much on your screen you can't find it. But
Oh, for sure.
I feel like I read something very recently that I had here that said 80,000, but I could be wrong because that does sound high.
Yeah, no, I'm not gonna lie. That sounds a little high. So I wish the median household income, if I'm not mistaken, according to the Census Bureau, if you want to check them real quick, the median household income is around $65,000, give or take. And so,
Mhm.
thing is, what people don't understand, that's two income
Oh,
earners.
oh, you know what I was looking at before? I just remembered. I didn't find it, but I think this is married households with an intact family, median
Intact families.
80.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
so either way, that's insane. If we divide that in half, that means either one of them is earning 60 and the other's 20. If you want to play, or someone's earning 40 and 40, that's in the grand scheme of things, it's really not a lot of money. And and so, you probably saw this stat that came out. Additional 8 million more Americans fell into poverty, during the height of the pandemic. And
Yeah.
man, that's bad news because we've got an employer-sponsored healthcare system that pretty much limits access to care if you don't have a job.
Mhm.
And then with Obamacare, if you don't have a job, well, hey, you can't pay those Obamacare premiums.
Yeah.
And so, oh, go ahead.
I was just saying with the Obamacare, I definitely struggled when I was in college.
Yeah.
Sorry, my
Oh,
dog just went crazy.
he hears Obamacare and he's
Yeah,
like, oh
he went
God.
crazy, got pissed off. Uh, no, I mean, I remember being in college just trying to think of, tax time's coming, and if I'm not enrolled, I have to pay a
$500
penalty.
penalty.
So I
Yeah.
think it first started, was it 200? Then next year was 500, or did it start at 500? I can't remember now, but I remember comparing it, okay, yearly. I was sitting there breaking it down yearly if I pay what I need to pay, what's going to be cheaper? So I ended up paying, I think, 2 or 3 years just paying the penalty at the end because I don't remember exactly, but when I did the math, it's like I'm going to save money and just pay the penalty because I
Yeah.
just couldn't afford it. I was broke. I was barely, I was going to college and then working on the weekends when I could. I just had no money. I couldn't spare an extra 200 plus bucks a month to pay for insurance that, in my opinion, I felt like I didn't need because, I'm relatively healthy and I didn't expect any accidents to happen, which I'm sure most of us don't expect accidents to happen, which is, you know, short-sighted, but I just couldn't afford it.
No, no, the structure of our healthcare system here not only reinforces, the rising cost. Well, when people, they want to talk about, our emergency rooms being full and whatnot, if we essentially not only opened access to Americans to having healthcare, it would shift the supply from having overrun emergency rooms to where they would actually be able to see a physician and address these problems before they're irreversible.
Mhm.
I think one of the top reasons cited for people not going to see a doctor is the cost.
Mhm.
And that's in my opinion that's immoral. That's that hey that it is an alien and foreign idea for anyone in the United Kingdom or in Canada or in any other first world industrialized nation that has a health a nationalized or a single payer healthcare system.
Mhm.
Uh, they don't they're like what do you mean that if you're sick you're going to go to the doctor and so and that's extremely problematic because again that thing that pretty much if I don't go to a doctor and address say a lump, and I know this is straw man, but just for example,
Mhm.
for all I know that could be a malignant tumor or or something that in the back of my mind I'm just going to be worrying about.
Yeah.
Well, instead of me addressing it right then and there, it would have been cheaper than getting, a 300, 400, 500,000 or, top, $1 million bill for cancer treatment in the United
Mhm.
States. And so, I mean, we need to open access to our healthcare because it's absurd at this point. I think insulin in the United States is like $300 for a pack. In Canada, it's like $20. I mean, I have friends and family. I know this is anecdotal. I have friends and family that go seek treatment in Mexico, than paying for it over here in Texas.
Mhm. Well,
And oh, I'm just saying that that's symptomatic of something's wrong.
yeah,
Something's
absolutely. And I was actually trying to do the math on like what would be cheaper because living here, uh, I had what was it? I've had like knee problems and hip problems, and I've had to go do MRIs,
yeah.
and it costs me about $200.
Okay.
And I was doing the math. Like if I did this in the States, this is $2,500 to $3,000 to get this done. It'd be cheaper for me to get a flight and fly here and then get it done and fly back than it would have been for me to get it done in the US. But the difference is the amount of wait time. So like I don't remember how long, but it was like a 3 month period of 3, 4 month wait period.
Hmm.
Which for some people it's like, okay, I get both arguments. On one side, you're saying, well, I would rather wait for 3 months and not get bankrupt than get it right away. But then on the other hand, if it's a more serious issue and I have to wait for 3, 4 months or longer, maybe, my life is on the line and I just can't get in because it's so packed.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree that there's an issue when I can go here and I can get something done for $200 that cost me thousands in the US. It's definitely
Oh,
an issue.
it's funny. I just got an MRI on this. What was today? Today is Friday here, Saturday for you, or is it the opposite now? Is it? Oh, it's
I'm on Saturday. Yeah.
okay. Yeah. So I got a MRI day before yesterday, and it was $281. And
How's
I'm
it
over.
possible?
Man, I have good insurance. I have Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I'm sitting there, and I was like, hey, or they pretty much get you registered and whatnot. They were like, okay, man, I'll find the receipt for you. Oh, where? It's
Is
probably.
is that it was that much because of your insurance paid the rest of it, or
My insurance paid the rest of the bill, but my payment was $281. And
you
you
know
know,
what the total was?
I'm gonna find that out if anything, because I was like, what the fuck, $281? Like I thought it was gonna be like $100, you know.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Well, yeah, when I was in the States last time, I was having some knee problems, and I was talking to them, and the quote that the doctor gave me while I was sitting there, he said it's going to be around 2,500 to 3,000, and
oh
I was just
shit,
shocked,
man.
and so I just didn't get anything done, and I came back to
I believe it. I
I came
believe it.
back here, and I just did it for $200, and I was thinking, wow, I just
I
saved
believe
myself
it.
thousands.
I'm being serious. I believe it. No, I'm thankful that I have good private healthcare insurance. But the fact of the matter is, we have so many uninsured and underinsured people in our country that is creating a bloat on our healthcare system to where they don't address these early stage issues. They become horrible problems for them that bankrupt them to where, I mean, you have families that instead of them seeking chemo, they choose to commit suicide. And that, like, man, that's a nightmare. And that is, I could not imagine, whether it's my father's friend or the hundreds of thousands, millions of Americans that don't have health insurance, that they're having to make these decisions between, hey, do I go to the doctor because I'm sick? And if I don't go to the doctor, I have to go to work. And
Mhm.
well, if I don't work, I'm going to get fired. And they're
Yeah.
having to weigh these options day in and day out. And man, briefly, it's a racket. It's absolutely a racket. But no,
Well,
I have good health insurance, man. So
I mean, I've never had health insurance in my life, really. I think maybe when I was a kid, I guess through my parents, but I don't really know what that was like because my parents, going back to the, you know, issues that we talked about at the beginning with drug abuse and whatnot, I've always been kind of in a dysfunctional situation. So I really have no idea, but I've just kind of been lucky that I've never really had to have anything serious done. But um, yeah,
no,
completely
I
different.
I think that that's a problem with our education system. Like, coming out of high school and hell, even college, I know how to fucking file my taxes. Like, because I had no, financial education in high school or even in college.
Mm.
And so I think that needs to be something embedded into our curriculum. And I think whether it's you or your listeners, the things I'm saying, I don't think are crazy. I
Mhm.
really don't, because the system that we currently have is not working, so
Mhm.
much so that people are willing to storm the United States Capitol, that their system isn't working, their voice isn't being heard.
Yeah.
You know what they're going to turn to? They're going to turn to violence. And then what do you have? You've got how many people were arrested at the Capitol riots? Hundreds, if not,
Yeah.
and and
Well,
so let oh go ahead.
that opens the door to what was it? It was a recent poll. Man, I can't remember. It was a poll. Maybe you heard of it. I'm not sure, but it was Democrats and Republicans saying when is violence acceptable to achieve like either a political end or to achieve something. I can't remember what it was, but the Democratic one was quite a bit higher, and then the Republican one was lower, but it was still higher than what I would generally expect. But then I was listening to these people arguing about it, saying, "Well, we're surprised it's not 100% because when it comes down to it, if you do have a government turning against everything that you believe in, then at some point, isn't everybody willing to use violence?" And it kind of connects to what you're saying. Like everybody's point is different. So maybe when I get, 60% aggravated, I'm going to storm the Capitol, but my neighbor needs to be 90% agitated before he storms the Capitol. So it just kind of depends on the different level of what people find is acceptable.
So personally, I do not, endorse the violence, whether it was the George Floyd riots or, of course, the U.S. Capitol insurrection.
Yeah,
Uh,
nor do I, just to make it clear. I'm 100% against all of that.
Yeah, but the story of history is violence. It is violence of groups against another group to achieve a means to an end. And how in a democratic society, in a constitutional republic, I think moneyed interests have poisoned the well so much that they have pretty much kept the people out of the conversation.
Hmm.
And in doing so, that instead of us, going to the ballot box and voting for a guy that's been in, power for 47 years and hasn't changed a fucking thing, and is the architect of the fucking war on drugs, is the architect of the surveillance state, is the architect of the situation that we're in. you know I think that's ironic to an extent.
Hmm.
But
Well, it's
but
also ironic, but not to get like overly, but like, you know, over the last year, we see this uprising against police authority. And then, well, I guess Kamala Harris did really bad. She got like less than 1%, but then being selected for the vice presidency. And then suddenly everybody's jumping on board as her amazing, powerful uh, black
yeah.
woman. But like a week earlier, everybody's going off against police authority and racism built into the system. But she's with her history, and I just found it very
No, no, it's
interesting.
absolutely, it is ironic. I mean, she has no mandate. She dropped out before Iowa. She got 0.1% of the Democratic vote. What mandate does Kamala Harris have?
Mhm.
However, I understand that, Joe Biden and Harris were elected. And so, I'm going to respect that she's in the vice presidency role. However, her history is a dark history. And for
Mhm.
people to not, acknowledge that are partisans. They don't want, and I don't mean that to be disparaging. It's the truth. If they don't want to listen to the facts about her history or Joe Biden's history or Trump's history or any of their history,
Mhm.
they are not motivated by objective reality, that they only want to stay in their ecosystem and their bubble.
Yeah.
And that is a component of the problem that we are currently seeing. And so with Joe Biden in particular, this unity candidate, that he claims to be, and whatnot. I honestly,
Hey, he's bringing us together.
man, honestly, so I seriously do believe that the social cohesion, the social fabric of the United States is held on by a thread, or threads. I'll be generous, but it has become a worse and worse situation, to where we have, there are alternative facts was not in the common nomenclature 20 years ago. Those were called lies. Those were called lies, right? Fake news was called fucking lies. And so it's when people hear me say this, like, they're like, wait a minute, like, you must be a Republican. God, no. I'm over here talking to you about, single payer healthcare systems, right?
Oh.
Yeah, I'm over here talking to you about raising taxes on the wealthy and our top income earners to, increase their tax burden, which is lowered, for the last 40 years. And so I honestly think that I believe in 2022, Joe Biden's going to essentially, he's going to be a lame duck president by 2022. The Republicans are going to win the House back, and they're going to win the Senate back. You know why? Because they didn't raise the minimum wage when they promised to. They didn't. They didn't deliver on the $2,000 checks. Hey, we're going to renege on that. We meant 1,400 because 1,400 plus 600 is 2,000. Yeah, we're sorry, guys. We couldn't get Joe Manchin on board, or Kristen Sinema.
Mhm.
And it's absurd. Imagine. I don't think anyone in I don't think any common person gives a fuck about bipartisanship. They care about good policies.
Mhm.
And I think there is a distinction, because I think partisans only toe the establishment line. They go along to get along.
Mhm.
Whereas policies that people actually want, they want the minimum wage raise. They want, a better healthcare system. They want better representation in Congress and in our political system. They want to, at the very least, have the opportunity to pursue happiness.
Yeah.
And in the last 30, 40 years, I think that is, essentially why deaths of despair are rising, because people don't, they don't feel that, yes, we have economic mobility, but it feels, and, the statistics are showing that that window is closing.
Mhm.
And so 2024, Joe Biden loses. I don't. He's barely talked about rerunning. I don't think he's going to rerun, but I think a Democratic president would lose, um, because they're just not meeting. They're just not meeting anything that they said. They've already lied about raising the minimum wage
Mhm.
and the $2,000 stimulus check. And so, if you're going to listen to the Senate parliamentarian versus the duly elected president and vice president of rules and whatnot,
Mhm.
I don't know what to tell you, man.
Well, I think it's interesting, like, one, like, you're talking about people care about the policy. I think that's true, and, like, if you were to go, I don't know if you've done this, but you look online and you watch videos, and, of course, these videos can be fixed to only show the ones that they want to show, but you see individuals, like, on college campuses, and they say, "Hey, what do you think about this policy?" And they're like, "Oh, this one's good, that one's bad, this one's good, that one's bad," and they're like, "Oh, well, do you know whose policy is whose?" And
Mhm.
you'll have these staunch, like, left wing or right wing people
Yeah.
that support the opposite policy, but they don't know who said it. But then you tell them afterwards who said it, and suddenly they're like, "Oh, well, oh, okay." And then they start justifying it and then making that policy against what they want.
Why do
And
you think?
uh, what's that? Sorry.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think
I
like there's this divorce between a name or a label attached to a policy?
I mean, it's the simple answer is like stubbornness. Like I know that I'm very stubborn as well. As I get older, I'm less and less stubborn. I think I'm more open to new ideas and willing to look at information, look at data to see where my faults are. Like having an interest in learning, but more so, I have an interest in not looking stupid. So, like, I don't want to be in a discussion with someone, and I've done this before, where I'm in a discussion with someone and I say something, acting like, okay, I heard this thing, so it must be true, and I
Yeah.
jump on it and I say it, and I just get blown away because I don't actually know the information behind what I'm saying, and I'm made to look stupid in front of people, and I have nothing to say. So I don't want to look stupid, and I think that's one of my bigger motivations. So it's jumping into the political field is I don't like going into situations where I people are having these discussions about things that matter, and I don't have enough knowledge to support the things that I'm saying.
No,
But it seems like, especially on college campuses, people have very strong opinions with very little information.
I agree. I agree. I think a good place for that is essentially I forget what the House bill or the Senate bill really that Senator Ted Cruz partnered with. Might have been Chuck Grassley. I might have that name wrong. Essentially talking about gun reform and whatnot, and especially with the last weeks mass shootings, and then that's how we know we're getting back to normal here in the United States. Is what I get.
Unfortunately, unfortunately.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that. Why do you think the United States, amongst the industrialized nations, so I'm talking about first world nations,
Mhm.
I believe gun violence or gun deaths in the United States, including suicides in the United Kingdom, is zero point 0.4 per 1,000 or 100,000, whereas it is in the United States 3 or 4 per 1,000 per 100,000. Why does it seem that gun violence is this uniquely American problem?
I think it seems that way because of the portrayal, but I mean, I don't have the numbers up here, but if you were to look at mass shooting violence, US is, behind several other industrialized nations. I don't even think it might be the top 10. For some reason, the number 11 is coming up to me, but there's a difference between what they consider mass shootings, which is four or more deaths, versus just gun deaths, which a big portion of gun deaths are through pistols, and a big portion of that is through suicides. And
Mm,
then when you break that down, a bigger portion of that is gang violence. So I think
yeah.
all of this needs to be broken down piece by piece. I mean, if we're just talking about deaths, well, death through knives is far beyond several multiples of rifle deaths.
Mhm.
So um, I don't necessarily have an answer to your question, but I do think it's a lot of it is connected to perception and what the media is telling people.
Okay. No, my brother and I were talking about this earlier. Because if you've got somebody like Ted Cruz, talking about universal background checks and like actually wanting to change the background check system, then
Mhm.
damn man, that guy's the most constitutionalist Republican I know.
Uh-huh.
And I again at the very least, um, you know, man, I'm a huge gun advocate. Like you could, I don't know if that's gonna surprise you or not.
I mean,
I
I'm split. I kind of, based on some of your leanings, I kind of just felt like you would be kind of like a proponent of uh, gun restriction, but I didn't. You're from Texas, so
I'm a rare breed. So man, I have. Let's see, I've got fuck. I can't even count them on one hand. So I have quite a few firearms. However, I grew up with firearms. My father taught me from a young age about gun safety and that a gun is always loaded, no matter what, whether it is or isn't,
uh-huh.
and and that's extremely important because in the last year, man, I haven't been able to buy ammo to save my life, no pun intended, having to show up at an academy at 7 o'clock in the morning on a Monday to wait in line to buy a box of ammo at, an actual fair price instead if you buy it off the line.
Uh-huh.
But you have 8 million to 12 million new gun owners in the United States, from 2020 to now.
Mhm.
That is problematic because these people don't know how to they're not training themselves and they haven't grown up with these guns because typically by the time I was 18, my dad had already given me several rifles. I grew up hunting, um, whereas in urban cities, do you think people in Houston, or actually I'm not going to say Houston, but in New York, San Francisco, in Detroit, Michigan, do you think they go hunting? Um,
They some of them for
some
certain
of them,
things.
some of them for certain, but not a majority of them.
Yeah.
And so I think this guy in particular, I don't know his name, and I don't even want to say his name because that I don't want to, glorify this piece of shit that,
Are you talking about
went.
Colorado?
Yeah,
Okay.
and even the one before that, I don't want to know their name. I don't want to say their names because
Yeah.
what they chose to do is so horrific
Yeah.
that it is I guess both you and I are of rational minds. I do not know as a rational person what would drive me to go murder and massacre 10 people.
Mhm.
And I agree with Ted Cruz, even though I disagree with him on a multitude of things. We need to expand background checks. Whether it's lengthening waiting periods for these people. Hell, I'll give you a personal story. So last year I got my first Ruger 5.56, which is now getting bastardized in the media and whatnot. It's a long rifle. It's an 18-inch barrel. I love the thing, man. It's a beautiful gun. And so I ordered it, and I had it sent to my local FFL, and I go to pick it up, and this is it in late March, early April, during the height of COVID, or during the height of the pandemic, in the sense of like, hey, where's this going?
Mhm.
This is when, the NBA, the MLB, Tom Hanks just got sick, and we
Okay.
didn't know where we were gonna go, but you have people bum rushing, these gun stores to purchase and buy guns. And so we could dive into the psyche of why are they feeling so insecure to go buy a gun. I don't, but I'm standing there. I've gone to my gun shop, a million times to pick up ammo, to pick up accessories, and just to see what they have in stock. However, I have never seen this many people in this gun shop. He
Uh-huh.
pulled out this little wheel where we had to pull a number to be serviced, and I'm sitting there behind the counter staring at my gun. I'm like, hey, that's my gun. I just need to fill out my form and pick it up and whatnot. But as I'm standing there, there's a man in a hoodie. He had his hood up, and he looked like a sketchy individual and
Yeah.
whatnot. And so he never filled out, the form for you to pick up your gun and for your background check. He was asking these really simplistic questions. Hey, do I have to answer like truthfully that I've smoked marijuana? Because
Yeah.
in the state of Texas, if you've smoked marijuana, I'm not sure if this is nationally, you cannot purchase a firearm and whatnot. It literally is a question on the
Really? Like
yeah, no,
in
it's
Texas?
literally a question on the form. And so he's asking all these stupid questions that you hey, just like literally put your name, your information, your date of birth,
Yeah.
your height, your weight, and whatnot. Have you been convicted of a felony? And even if you have been convicted of a felony by you even attempting to pick up that piece of paper, that is a felony, or pick up that gun, that is a felony. Trying to purchase that weapon.
Uh-huh.
And so this guy was, asking all these dumb questions. I'm getting annoyed. Everyone in the shop is getting annoyed. And the guy just dips. He just dips out.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, oh, hey, I get to, get my gun faster. And about 15, 20 minutes goes by. I put in my information, get the, green light to proceed, checks me out. And as I'm walking out, this guy is surrounded by 6 ATF agents, pretty much like, hey, I could overhear them like, hey, buddy, why are you even trying to pick up this gun? You're a felon. So in that instance, that is a case of our background system or background check system working.
Yeah.
However, there are loopholes in our background check system that, like people who have a propensity for violence, like this last guy, should not have been able to get a gun, you
Mhm.
know. And I don't think that's a slippery slope. I think if you have a history of violent behavior, you don't need to own a gun. You need to go to therapy, and you need to have access to better mental health services. I don't think that's a crazy outlandish idea. You've got Ted Cruz pushing that, and so it's in my purview. I don't think that's an infringement on our Second Amendment. We want to make sure the right people have access to these guns because, guys, like I mean, I love guns. I love gun culture. I a lot of friends and family that hey, we like going shooting. We like I just purchased an HK VP9L. I call it my wick stick, and I wanted to go show my dad and whatnot because I mean he probably has he's a big CZ guy, big Winchester guy, and he's never seen, like, an HK, an Austrian pistol, and
Mhm.
it's definitely a little foreign for him. But I mean, at the very least, do you agree with Senator Ted Cruz on us expanding background checks? Do you think we should go to a licensing model like the Swedes do? It might be the Swedes or they're in Switzerland. What do you think we should do? Because this is a recurring issue
Uh,
time and time again.
let me give me 1 second. I'm gonna answer that. One
Gotcha.
second. Sorry, 1 second. You gotta look at my actual background, which has a dog
Hey,
cage and an exercise ball.
it's all good, man. It's all good. I hope you like my portrait and whatnot. Welcome back. Welcome
Sorry.
back. It's all good, buddy.
All right. So I have mixed feelings on this because my knowledge is a little bit low, and I know how I feel personally about the right to bear arms for sure. But I've been trying to get people to come on here recently. I've been doing some posts trying to get gun advocates and people that are uh, against guns to come on here and share with me their opinions and why they think that way. Just because I don't know a lot about it, even though in my past, there's always kind of been guns around, and my brother's a big advocate. He's got a safe full of guns. I just don't know a lot about it. And so for me, there's a part of me that doesn't understand the argument about, like a government registry.
Hmm.
There's people saying they do not want the government to know what guns they have. They don't want a registry of all the weapons in the United States, which I don't necessarily understand the argument. And I'm sure that there's reasons for why they believe that or why they feel that way, but I just don't know what they are because I haven't been able to go in depth about it to understand it.
Oh yeah, I think that when we talk about registry, they worry about the surveillance state more than anything. That they're going to come knocking on our doors. Um, I it is a like anything we've talked about is a nuanced issue. It is one I think guns in American society, it's unique. Is ingrained into our culture. However, there are these bad people that are getting a hold of these, and they're going up and creating a public health crisis by shooting up grocery stores, theaters, schools, kindergartens, and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
Another aspect that people don't want to talk about is gun suicides, and that's a part of that book that I recommended, Deaths of Despair. And why are people choosing to just shoot themselves in the head, or look up ways to make a suicide bag? But gun suicides in the United States has been continuing on the rise for the last 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly think that if I not only think, I believe, I really do believe, if we address the economic situations of these desperate people, I'm talking about the people that are committing suicide. I'm not talking about the mass shooters. I think that is ideologically driven. And my brother said something to me earlier. There are some men or men and women that want to watch the world burn,
Mm-hmm.
that there's something wrong with them. And I don't think these people should have access to guns because typically they're indicators of them, whether it's violence in high school, antisocial disorders, that have been diagnosed and whatnot. And I think that's absolutely fair game that, these people should not have access to guns,
Yeah.
But I think the legislation pushed, like, the automatic bans and whatnot, and the large capacity magazine bans of the 90s, those didn't fucking work. And
Well, I don't know if you recall, but Biden just the other day said that they did work. So
yeah, I know. And that's the funny thing about the truth is that politicians love to spin it. And so this is a problem, whether it's the war on drugs or whether it's, gun violence. If we want to actually address the problem of these problems, for example, the biggest customers are drug cartels in Mexico that are poisoning America. Just answer the question. The biggest customers are Americans. Well, how do we actually address, people? There's clearly a want and a need, for Americans to change their reality, to make themselves, whether it's, achieve a high or do whatever the fuck they want to do, because that essentially is the libertarian argument, is that we should
yeah.
legalize all drugs and tax the shit out of them. That would undercut and kneecap drug cartels. That would actually address the problem of drug overdoses, through heroin and fentanyl in the United States. If we want to attack gun suicides, well, why are people so unhappy? Well, typically speaking, a number one indicator of their unhappiness is their economic well-being, and essentially household debts, in the last several years have continued to increase. And with the Democrats, the neoliberals, whatever you want to call them, the establishment, they want to I agree with, whether it's Rand Paul or Ted Cruz, they want to attack the law-abiding citizen. They want to create victims. But where I think there's overlap is that, hey, like, yeah, these people don't need to have guns. You know, there's something wrong with them. They actually need mental health counseling. They need a psychiatrist. They need a psychologist, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with not being okay. But if we don't address those early health outcomes, sooner, then you have people, just going to the gun store, picking up, a Ruger EC9S and just, popping themselves in the head because it's quick, it's painless, and it's cheap.
Mhm.
And so it's sad because, if, a colleague of mine was asking me about, hey, what was that one in Florida? I was like, oh shit, I don't know. I don't know because there's been so many.
Mhm.
And whether it was the, in the 60s with the UT Tower shooter and, Stoneman Douglas, Parkland, and then now the two most recent ones. I mean, I think we have a problem on our hands that at the very least needs to be addressed meaningfully, but it doesn't need there's one thing. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. And so if we don't do anything, I think it's worse than not doing anything at all because we're going to keep having the same conversations. You're going to keep having Joe Biden talking about his hairy legs and talking about, how gun magazine bans worked in the 90s when in fact they really didn't. And so that legislation pretty much limited access to actual gun pretty much law-abiding Americans. That didn't address any gun violence issues because as we both know, in Chicago and Detroit, Michigan, and these inner cities and urban centers, they have gang violence, death rates nearly on par with WADAs and in Afghanistan.
Mhm.
That's insane. That is absolutely insane. And so I don't know like what the actual solution is, but I know that us, just throwing our hands up and not doing anything isn't working either.
Yeah, I'm wondering because one of the things you're talking about is that there's these mass shootings going on, but if we were to go down, so here's my worry.
Yeah.
I don't know where to draw the line, and it's going to come to a point where I say, okay, well, felons, and then it goes to the next step and the next step because mass shootings, in my opinion, are going to keep happening no matter what. And a lot of these people that do these mass shootings, even with all the gun restrictions and the background checks, they would have still been able to get a firearm. It's really hard to identify all these people before they do it. And so then you're going to get it more and more strict. And then it's okay. Well, anybody that's on any antidepressant medication cannot have a weapon. And then it opens a whole other can of worms. It's like, okay, so I don't have the right to protect myself just because I'm depressed. Um, and so when I'm looking at like mass shootings, so I'm just on time right now,
Mm-hmm.
and in uh, I'm not 100% sure because I just went to this quickly because I was thinking the amount of mass shootings per year is like around 7 or so. But I did want to say it if I'm not correct. And we've got 370 or 360, 70 million people in the United States, and depression is going up, up, up. So we're bound to have these people that commit these acts. And so, for example, I'm looking at a page right now and it's showing killed versus wounded in 2019, 57 killed, 78 wounded out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 mass shootings. 2018, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 mass shootings. Uh, 2017, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So it's for me, out of that amount of people with depression going up, even if there's a million people, I would assume out of that a million people, how if you put 100 people in a room, how many of those people are going to bound to have some sort of crazy ideas? you're bound to have someone in that room with some crazy ideas. Now you expand that to millions of people. How many people in that category are bound to have like homicidal ideas? And it keeps going up. And so these restrictions, I just don't see a way of creating restrictions that are going to net these people in without also restricting the rights of law-abiding citizens.
I think that's fair. I do. And again, I think this is an issue that is nuanced, is extremely, complex, because how do how do we address, the rises of, depression? How do we address the rises of, gun deaths, and mass shootings without infringing upon the rights of law-abiding citizens? It's excuse me. It's that COVID. And the thing is if we don't, is the opportunity cost that, hey, am I weighing that if I go to the grocery store, to the theater, is that okay? Am I taking the risk that by me going here, I'm gonna, I'm taking the risk of getting, shot up, and and I'll be on the news at 9 o'clock tonight? Is that, something that, Americans want to live with? And I think if you ask the majority of Americans, I don't think they would be okay with that. But at the same time, how do we address the problem without infringing upon these rights? And so, whether it's a universal background check system, licensing, I think is tough. I haven't done a lot of reading on licensing and registration of firearms. I know not the United Kingdom, Australia did it. I know New Zealand did it after the synagogue shooting in, what was that, 2017, 2018. And it's a mixed bag. It really is, because I don't want to create victims, but at the same time, I don't want to, allow these psychopaths and, people that, honestly, this is something I was going to say. I believe in the death penalty as a principled measure, in the sense that it should be only utilized for mass killers, that they have done something so horrific that the state has no choice but to ensure that. How do you rehabilitate someone that has killed 10 people in a grocery store? How do you rehabilitate someone who killed 8 women, in massage parlors? How do you rehabilitate someone that killed kids in a kindergarten? You can't. I don't think anyone that is serious is going to sit here and tell me that you can rehabilitate them, because what justice is that for American taxpayers to pay for I don't know if there's a word for it. I don't know if there's a word for how horrific of an action they committed. And so I think the state's only solution is to eliminate them. It is to actually see justice for the families and the loved ones that have suffered, the losses of their friends and families. And I think that's where I differ with a lot of my contemporaries. I know the death penalty gets things wrong in terms of, whether it's in nonviolent crimes or violent crimes or people that have been accused. I'm not talking about that. I don't want anybody to misrepresent what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I believe the death penalty should only be used for mass murderers, because of what they did is so horrible, is so black and white. I can't take anyone serious that is saying that they could be rehabilitated. And I think that's where I differ with a lot of my contemporaries.
I think it depends on who you're talking to and in what facet you're talking to them as well. Because the first thing that you say the first thing where my mind goes when you say that is, I agree with you. But then I start thinking back, like in my history and my experiences in the past, and I think of, okay, how about religiously? When I was younger, there are people in the Bible that, committed horrible acts and that were later forgiven. And so from the religious crowd, you would get some resistance on that, thinking that no matter how horrible, no matter what someone does, no matter how horrible it is, they're still capable of being forgiven. And so, strictly from a religious standpoint, I think
Mhm.
they would argue that this person deserves to continue their life and work towards gaining forgiveness, whether it's a possibility in other people's mind or not. So I think that would be one area of resistance that you would get. For
Okay.
me personally, I would say, yeah, they deserve to die. But I do have that part of me in the past where I did have that strong religious connection that is that just feels like it's not our place to kill anybody.
Yeah.
But I agree with you though. So this is
It's
kind of
tough.
part of my like evolving mind where I'm adapting and changing my perspectives because I'm clearly not set in my ways on certain issues. Um, but as you just said, anyone that doesn't think that way, you couldn't really take seriously. I don't want you to not be able to take me seriously, but I do have a conflict.
and, I don't want my words to be misconstrued. I know I said I wouldn't take them seriously, but if that option was even on the table or even considered, I think it would be absurd. In Texas, I believe what was it, the synagogue or the Sutherland Springs, shooting. I think he's seeing the death penalty. Uh, and I think I think what you're talking about is redemptive suffering, or just redemption. And I do think, to an extent my mind is willing to be changed, but that is such a horrific act, you out of no fault of their own, you know doing something as trivial as shopping for groceries or enjoying a movie that they didn't know that they were targets of a mass murderer. And legislatively speaking, it is such a hard issue to legislate because on one hand, it would be hard for me to sit here and say that you know all would it actually fix the problem. The thing is, we don't know because we haven't done anything. We continue to just every week, every month, we're going back to normal now. So when the next one happens, we'll have a similar conversation about, well, hey, we can't infringe upon the rights of law-abiding citizens,
Mhm.
so therefore throw our hands up, let's not do anything about it. And I think if anything was going to change, was when all those, I believe it was Parkland, when 3, 4, 5 year olds were murdered.
Mhm.
And I think if anything was going to change, it was then. Because the majority of Americans wanted gun legislation, but the Obama administration failed to deliver as far as meaningful gun reform. And I just, it's such a tough issue because you know I'm a principled leftist that believes that uh, we got to do something about this problem. However, I'm born in Texas and raised around guns, and
Yeah.
I'm a gun owner myself, and I don't want confiscation to be legislated. That would be absurd. Logistically speaking, I don't think it's possible to confiscate.
Yeah. Well, I think in that situation, you'd have a bunch of law-abiding citizens maybe giving up their weapons. You'd have others resisting, and then you'd have, on top of that, you'd have a border being. You'd basically magnify the issue with the cartel because then that's just another industry that they're going to flourish in because they're going to keep running weapons across the border. So
Absolutely.
it's gonna magnify what we're dealing with the drug issues across the border. It's gonna be a whole other situation.
Exactly. To summarize and wrap everything up, is the problems that we face as Americans are extremely nuanced and complex. And anyone that tries to provide, hey, it's black or white, that's not true. Like, are there actual easy solutions to the problems we face? Yes. Changing our healthcare system from a multi-payer healthcare system to a single-payer healthcare system. I think that would address the deaths of despair that we've seen on the rise. Whether with gun legislation, that one is such a tricky issue. There's two issues that I don't like talking about: gun reform and immigration. Because on one hand, you know, um, undocumented immigrants that come into the country, undermines working class individuals, and depresses wages, right?
Mhm.
Well, I think a solution to that, to briefly, is actually fine, these companies that are exploiting labor of undocumented immigrants and whatnot. And so, yeah, but those are two typical topics that I don't really enjoy talking about because, man, you can piss a lot of people off. And,
Absolutely.
so, oh, buddy, what are we at right now?
We're at what is it? What time we start? 11:21, 22:20. So two, is it 2 hours right now? 11,
Oh,
oh
man, it
no,
might be
3 hours.
three. Wow,
Wow.
buddy.
You know what? You know what's interesting? I, I've got this thing pulled up on my screen that I wanted to ask you about at the very beginning of our conversation when you talked about
Yeah.
doing a poll. And then I've got this other thing over here where, I originally thought we were going to go into minimum wage discussion about economy.
We didn't even talk
We didn't
about
even
that.
get to it, but we touched on it a few times where I wanted to jump into it, but I was like, if we jump into this, we're looking at like an 8 hour conversation. So I just didn't go into it. But I would love for you to come back on and we can talk about it a little bit if
Very-
that's something you're open to.
Hey, of course, friend. I'm more than happy to come back on
All
and talk
right.
about
Awesome.
what.
Do you mind if I just this last thing that's connected to what you talked about at the very beginning, if I
Yeah,
just bring this up to you and then you can kind of give your insight on that and then we'll
yeah,
wrap it
for
up.
sure. For sure.
Okay, cool. So kind of at the beginning, you were talking about how you went from left to right, and you were talking about you did that poll about what people are most concerned about. Are you familiar with the echelon poll that
No,
was
go
done?
go
I
ahead. Fill
think
me
it
in.
was a few weeks ago. So this is kind of one of the issues that I ran into, or I mean, that kind of verifies one of the problems that I have kind of with the left. So when the they basically did a poll on what is your biggest concern
Yeah.
for people on the left and on the right. And on the left, the biggest concern, 82% of people said their biggest concern was Donald Trump supporters. Their second
Oh,
biggest concern was white nationalists. Their third biggest concern is systemic racism. And their fourth biggest concern, gun violence. And then fifth was Americans lacking in health coverage. So
wow.
it's it's basically you go down three notches. The first three biggest concerns with uh, the left is sorry, my girlfriend wanted to see who I was talking about. I'm talking to. Um, this is one of the biggest problems. It seems like the left is worried about people to where the right is more worried about ideas. So let me go over the same thing on the right. Their number one concern, 81%, is illegal immigration. 79% is lack of support for the police. Third, 77% is high taxes. And then fourth, 75 liberal bias in mainstream media.
Hmm.
It just kind of goes down. You don't see anything on the right that is, and I think that's one of the problems with censorship that we talked about earlier is that on the left, their biggest concerns are these horrible Trump supporters, white nationalists, and systemic racism, and they want to cut it out of society, which then classifies this huge group of people, 70 million people or whatnot that voted for Trump, within this category of people that are horrible because, as you can see, the Trump supporters are the number one concern. So it's classifying this huge portion of the American population into this category and saying, "Well, we need to get these rid of these people. We need to purge these people." But on
Yeah.
the right, it's about issues about immigration, support for police, and taxes. So
Yeah.
that kind of goes into one of my bigger things that's been building over the years. It's the left is concerned about people and censoring them, to where the right seems more concerned with policy.
Yeah, no, and so this is something Thomas Frank's "What's the Matter with Kansas?" I encourage you and your listeners to read. Is it talks about what's happened, in the United States of America. Essentially, how did people go from actually caring about the material well-being of people to what is as we described, the culture war. And so essentially, with with immigration or with Donald Trump supporters or with immigration, it's tough because it's both a culture war issue and an economic issue, in fact. And so it's one of those that I'll put into the middle category of, a blended issue. Um, with Donald Trump supporters, white supremacists, things like that, like, yes, of course, those are concerns, but those don't address the actual material well being of people. And so I think that's where I differ from, people who respond to that poll. If you asked me what the biggest concern is that is facing the United States right now is essentially economic concerns. It is essentially wealth inequality in the United States, where CEOs in the 1970s were making only 30 times more than their lowest paid worker, and now they're making hundreds to thousands of times more than their lowest paid worker, currently. And so why have wages stayed stagnant in the last 30, 40 years? And so it's these actually address what is going on. And I think power structures in particular in the establishment don't want us to talk about these, because you know what that does? That affects their bottom line and affects their bottom dollar, because if they could keep robbing us from the back door, then they'll keep doing it. I mean, perfect example was essentially after the January 6th insurrection, was essentially you've got companies like Coca-Cola, you've got Comcast, they're pulling all of their lobbying from Republicans. They're like, hey, we're not going to associate ourselves with Republicans. And Mitch McConnell pretty much, gathered up all the Republican caucus. It was like, hey, motherfuckers, we got to fix this. We got to denounce this, yada, 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 because we are losing money. And until things actually affect people's bottom dollars and affects them monetarily, that's when they're going to actually address things. And so, to touch on this on the left, it almost sounds like, I mean, in both ways, there's, liberal bias in the media on the right, like, as a concern. And then on the left, Donald Trump supporters, white supremacists. What was number 3?
For which side? For
Oh,
the
yeah.
left?
Yeah, people would.
It was Donald Trump supporters at 82%, white nationalism at 79%, systemic racism at 77%, then gun
Yeah.
violence 76%, and Americans lacking health coverage was 75%.
Well, at least, I guess a few of them
Healthcare made it up there.
Yeah, I'm glad. Wow.
Top
Thank God. Thank God. And so, it's like, how did values and culture co-opt, our economic well-being, our basics being met? And that's, kind of what the book talks about. But it's because we see it on both sides. This a good example was the nomination to the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden. She is an enemy of the people. She wants essentially, not pay workers a living wage. She wants to not actually do things that would address their economic well-being. She wants to go into Syria and take oil to pay, for social welfare programs here in the United States. Not something an actual progressive or an actual principled person would want, right? And so I think essentially we've been co-opted by a bunch of, what's the term? Regulatory capture. And to where essentially you have people that come from the private industry that go work in public industry to change the rules to benefit, corporations and whatnot, to where, you saw it all last summer. Hey, the Black Lives Matter movement, which, I do support, but I don't support, companies coming out and making sure to let it be known that, hey, they're all for, diversity and equity. Well, why don't you just pay your fucking people more? How about that? At the very least, like that would address the problem right there. You want to talk about systemic racism? Well, pay them more. And instead, like, they'll spend 10 or 15 million dollars on commercials, but they won't pay their workers more. And so it's problematic. There's a really good poll, I love polls over here, done by Gallup, and it's a trust in the United States. And over the last decade, trust, Americans now, as of most recently, view the other political party as the enemy on both sides. According to this poll, that's a problem. That is a huge problem, and that goes into what we were talking about earlier with social cohesion. What do you do when you can't even talk to your neighbor? When you can't even talk to someone who disagrees with you?
Yeah.
And so I think that values these establishment dark moneyed interests have co-opted corrupted Americans to where we're distracted by culture war issues and we're not actually addressing the problems at hand, whether it's our economic system or whether it's our healthcare system or the number of other infrastructures that we just have not fixed and continue to wither away for the last 30 and 40 years.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think I think Gallup had a poll that was asking of what people trusted more, the media or the government. I can't remember what the outcome was, but thought that was an interesting question. Made me scratch my
Yeah.
head a little bit.
No, you're right. In that poll, it goes. It's a part of it. The trust in governments has declined. Because we could continue to be let down by these career politicians that go in bright eyed and blue eyed. But I think this is an interesting stat. I don't have the number, but I know anyone that goes into Congress or goes into the Senate, they come out rich as hell, man. And then
Yeah.
they go work at Amazon, they'll go work at Google, they'll go work at whatever, monopoly. And, essentially they pass legislation while they're in power. Well, hey, their payback is getting that, multi-million-dollar salary and stock options and whatnot. So
Yeah.
it's a dark state of affairs. It really is. And I think we're more divided than ever. We're not talking about the things that we actually need to talk about, like the minimum wage, which I think we're gonna have to leave to until next time.
Yeah, I think so. Actually, I would love it if, you can come on soon because, that's something I do want to talk about. And that's actually what I got up here. I kind of thought we would get into, but I like where we ended up going. It was natural and worked out well. So hopefully you can come back on and we'll kind of get into it. I think we'll have more disagreements in that area based on some of the windows you've given. I think we'll have some disagreements there, but I think it'll be interesting to talk about. And I think you'll know a lot more about it than I will. And I'll just kind of give the stuff my perception and see what you have to say about it.
Hey, of course, man. I can't wait until next time. We gotta definitely we gotta get this scheduled soon and whatnot. So we'll
Yeah,
we'll talk about that after the show. So
for sure. Yeah, I look forward to it. Is there any shout out, any information you want to give on how people can contact with you or find you?
hey, yeah, for sure. You can follow me on Spotify or wherever you get podcasts on at unDunn Podcast. Follow me on Instagram at William_undunn, or you can shoot me an email at undunnpodcast@gmail.com.
All right, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I really appreciate you coming on. And this has been Systemically Distorted Communication. If you have any problems with anything that you've heard here, a little bit of controversial stuff, go ahead and send me or William a message. For me, it's systemicdcommunication@gmail.com. And until next time, thanks for tuning in.
Of course. Hey, y'all take it easy. Have a good night.